Carlson. CBN News Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl reports.
U.S. Special Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are due to meet with Iran's foreign minister for a third round of talks in Geneva, Switzerland on Thursday. Witkoff says President Trump is puzzled that Iran hasn't already agreed to a deal.
Why under this sort of pressure with the amount of sea power, naval power that we have over there, why they haven't come to us and said, we profess that we don't want a weapon, so here's what we're prepared to do, and yet it's hard to sort of get them to that place.
With massive U.S. firepower in the region, President Trump is said to be considering preliminary limited military strikes to force Iran into an agreement. Israel is on its highest alert as it prepares for Iranian retaliation if the U.S. attacks Iran. In recent days, the IDF striking Hezbollah targets in Lebanon as the Iranian proxy would likely join the fight. Iran's president says the government will not yield to external pressure. The state news agency reports student protests at several universities following memorials for those killed in the January protests. Visiting U.S. Congressman Andy Ogles told CBN News in Jerusalem that regime change needs to be organic.
What we've seen over the last few weeks is that the Persian people, the people of Iran, want change. They want their country back. And so I think there's the opportunity for the United States to create that window for the Persian people to, assume their own destiny. But it has to be from the Persian people, the people of Iran. No American boots on the ground.
Ogles says the change would revolutionize Iran, the Middle East, and even the world.
They've destabilized regions all over, countries all over the world, and it'll be a huge shift and quite frankly opens up the opportunity at least for peace globally once Iran is no longer in the picture and quite frankly their global network of terror.
On the sidelines, Arab and Muslim nations condemned U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee's comment about the Middle East in an interview with Tucker Carlson last week. Carlson quoted from Genesis chapter 15 and asked Huckabee if Israel has a right to all that land. In part, Huckabee responded, it would be fine if they took it all. But the U.S. Embassy later pointed out it was taken out of context. Huckabee continued,
they're not asking to go back to take all of that, but they are asking to at least take the land that they now occupy, they now live in, they now own legitimately, and it is a safe haven for them.
He also said Israel isn't trying to take over Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, or Iraq, just trying to protect itself. U.S. Congressman Scott Perry, who is visiting Israel for the first time, told CBN News that the situation is complicated and it's important to see the facts on the ground.
A lot of people really don't fully understand what the people of Israel deal with on a daily basis, how close your adversaries are, and tactically the advantages they have based on terrain. All those kind of things are important for policymakers to know viscerally.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
More talks planned for Thursday between Iran and the US, which is mobilizing its largest military force since the invasion of Iraq more than 2 decades ago. Mixed messages from US President Donald Trump, while Tehran says it wants talks but is ready for war too. So where do both sides stand? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. The US and Iran gear up for more talks on Thursday, with mixed messages from both sides as the world anxiously wonders what's next. Iran says it wants talks, but is ready for war if they fail. US President Donald Trump is apparently surprised Iran hasn't capitulated. He's deployed the biggest military force the US has assembled in the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. At the centre of the build-up is the aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, with fighter jets including F-18s and F-35s, as well as electronic warfare aircraft. It's supported by several guided missile destroyers operating in the Gulf of Oman and nearby waters. A second strike group is on its way. The USS Gerald R. Ford is currently crossing the Mediterranean, flanked by 3 destroyers. Flight tracking data also shows a surge in activity with multiple squadrons of attack aircraft, refueling tankers, cargo and surveillance planes moving between the US, Europe and the Middle East. All of this is well within range of Iran's extensive arsenal of weaponry. Its medium-range ballistic missiles can travel around 2,000 kilometers, capable of reaching targets in Israel as well as American bases in Turkey and across the Gulf. So what does this military and diplomatic choreography signal? Are the talks meaningful negotiations or just a sideshow? Why would the US assemble such firepower if it doesn't intend to use it? And how might Iran respond? We'll talk to our panel of guests in just a few moments. But first, this report from Alexandra Byers.
The American war machine is assembling in the Middle East, while Iranian forces are testing air defense missiles and holding naval drills with Russia, all ahead of another round of indirect talks about Iran's nuclear program, set to be held in Geneva on Thursday. Tehran insists a diplomatic solution is possible, and the president is framing the negotiations so far as encouraging. Posting on social media, Iran is committed to peace and stability in the region. He noted the latest discussions included the exchange of practical proposals and yielded encouraging signals. He went on to say Tehran continues to monitor U.S. actions closely and has made all necessary preparations for any potential scenario. The U.S. president has repeatedly threatened escalation to force a deal. Iran's nuclear program has long been the core issue for Washington and the West. But added to that now is its crackdown on anti-government protesters last month, which led to more sanctions.
For 47 years, they've been talking and talking and talking. In the meantime, we've lost a lot of lives while they talk, and legs blown off, arms blown off, faces blown off. This has been going on for a long time, so let's see what happens. In the meantime, we have tremendous power has arrived, and additional power, as you know, and other carriers going out shortly. So we'll see it how. If we could get it settled for once and for all, that would be good.
But Tehran has made it clear it will not give in to pressure and will defend itself.
I think there is no limited strikes. An act of aggression would be regarded as an act of aggression, period. And any state would react to an act of aggression as part of its inherent right of self-defense ferociously. So that's what we would do.
The U.S. special envoy involved in the negotiations admitted President Trump thought the military buildup would have pushed Iran to concede by now.
He's curious as to why they haven't, I don't want to use the word capitulated, but why they haven't capitulated. Why under this sort of pressure with the amount of sea power, naval power that we have over there, why they haven't come to us and said, we profess that we don't want a weapon. So here's what we're prepared to do, and yet it's hard to sort of get them to that place.
At the heart of the talks is enriched uranium. Iran wants enough for civilian, not military purposes. The U.S. and Israel want zero enrichment. Both sides believe they hold leverage, but the stakes are incredibly high. Even limited strikes could engulf the region, with energy supply routes and global markets hanging in the balance. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss all of this with our panel of guests joining us on today's Inside Story. We have Jamal Abdi, president of the National Iranian-American Council. He joins us from Washington, D.C. In Tehran, Hassan Ahmadian is assistant professor at the University of Tehran. And also in Washington, D.C., Richard Weitz is senior fellow at the NATO Defense College. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us. Well, as you heard there, Richard, in our intro, two simultaneous things are going on. A great big military build-up, absolutely vast. In fact, we talk about an armada, but there are two aircraft carriers, each surrounded by lots of ships. You could, in fact, say it's a double armada that the US is gathering there. At the same time, there is diplomacy ongoing, more talks taking place on Thursday. Which of those two tracks, the military or the diplomatic, in your view, Richard, has the upper hand right now?
Right. I don't see them necessarily as conflictual in the sense that in President Trump's view, having the military deployments could actually facilitate the diplomatic track. I think, President Trump would prefer a negotiated settlement, and he certainly engaged in a variety of contacts, primarily through the direct talks, but also indirectly through various intermediaries. And then the military forces give him a bunch of options if he wants to employ them. But I still think the focus for now is on the diplomatic track with the military forces in the background.
Hassan, when we do this game of working out what's going to happen, it's a mug's game, really, in the Middle East, because it's such a combustible region with so many moving parts. Let me ask you the question a different way. How worried are people in Tehran right now about what might happen?
Well, people are concerned with all the deployments into the region. The Iranians see what is going on rather differently from what was just described. The Armada, as they call it, is part of a capitulation effort that was talked about by Steve Witkoff just yesterday. They want to force Iran to capitulation. That's how the Iranians understood it. And obviously, what the envoy said reinforces that message. And that's why the Iranian view and posture is mirroring that of the United States, in that Iranians are talking diplomacy and preferring diplomacy, but at the same time are showing their strength, projecting power, trying to keep the U.S. forces at bay in talks. So they're also backing their diplomatic effort with what they have as military equipment and military might.
Jamal, of course, in some ways, you could argue we've seen some of this before, because there were negotiations taking place last year between the US and Iran. And then, of course, while those negotiations were taking place, with more talks planned, in fact, on the 15th of June, there were supposed to be talks in Muscat, the capital of Oman. 2 days before that, Israel attacked. And the US clearly knew about that. Do you think this time the US is negotiating in good faith?
That's a really good question. I think that this time it's more clear and transparent what Donald Trump's view of negotiations truly is. And it's one that focuses pretty intensely on the coercive element of it. I do think, though, that I think Donald Trump is sort of a gambler here who has doubled and tripled down on what really was a bluff and was not intended to be something that committed the United States to a open-ended war with Iran. I think that Trump must be concerned that there is really no sort of low-risk, cheap option here to strike Iran and then quickly get out and not be committed to some long-term, potentially long-term military exchange. And so I think that Trump and the Trump administration, just as the Iranians, have a lot of interest here in finding some way to get to a deal, because the military alternative, I don't think, has been very well thought out. And I think if they have to go in that direction, it's going to be a major investment of time, resources, human capital, not to mention political capital for the administration.
Richard, are we even seeing the language of diplomacy? Hassan was referring a moment ago to recent comments in an interview by Steve Witkoff, one of Trump's lead negotiators in this, saying Trump is curious that the Iranians have not yet capitulated. But shouldn't they be negotiating, not talking about surrender?
I think in practice they are negotiating. According to the various media sources, there are a variety of proposals under discussion. I think we understand the issues in contention. They're primarily related to Iran's nuclear program, and there are three core issues here. It's how much enrichment should take place in Iran itself, what to do with the uranium that Iran has already enriched, and what kind of transparency measures should be enforced to monitor any sensitive Iranian nuclear activities going forward. And so those three issues, you can think of a variety of trade-offs. Some can be addressed immediately, some earlier. There are other issues that have been raised: Iran's missile program, ties with proxies, treatment of protesters, and so on. But I think the core is going, at least in the near term, will be the nuclear issues. And I think there's still discussions about various options that.
Jamal, is it that clear cut? Because, I mean, I've been trying to read what the US position is, what the US desired outcome is, and different people in the administration seem to, as they did last year, say different things. Is it, Trump has said repeatedly, Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, and Iran says it doesn't want a nuclear weapon. But is their position clearly no enrichment?
No, and that's really a big problem with the president's diplomatic efforts in his second term. I don't think that the last round of negotiations that preceded the June strikes were ones in which the United States had a clear position until near the end of those talks when the military adventure broke out. And as you note, Donald Trump has always said no nuclear weapons. That's sort of ambiguous, but I think people who are trying to look at things glass half full, people who hope for a deal, thought that that was sort of ambiguous enough that it left room for a creative solution that maybe did not cross the Iranian red line of zero enrichment, but satisfied some of the skeptics of the JCPOA that Iran wouldn't be able to break out. Since then, this zero enrichment position has somewhat hardened politically in the United States. That came as Republicans in Congress sent multiple letters sort of demanding the administration maintain this position. And so I still think it's in flux, but there's sort of two parallel processes happening. There's sort of the process that is being run by bureaucrats and technocrats and sort of the political machinations of Washington around what diplomacy needs to look like from a Republican president. And then there's the Trump process, which is a little bit more make it up as you go along and spitball. And so perhaps somewhere between those two processes, there is actually a solution here. But when you are hearing on one hand about sort of ambiguous goals about bottom lines like the nuclear program, on the other hand, you hear people talking about the need for Iran not just to prove that its nuclear program is not for military purposes, but potentially has to limit its ballistic missile distance, potentially has to eliminate support for proxies in the region. Then you get into this territory where I think it's very hard to imagine that the United States is negotiating from a position of good faith, because those are big, unwieldy challenges that need serious negotiations to ever potentially unpack. And what we have here is sort of this gunboat, we want a fast answer negotiation. And so I think that is a much more favorable scenario for a simple solution that is more of a compromise and is only focused on the nuclear issue versus this broad, comprehensive deal that I think people who don't actually want a deal are saying must be what is on the table.
Hassan, perhaps you could give us clearly what the Iranian position is on enrichment. I think I'm right in saying Iran says that under the 1970 Non-Proliferation Treaty, that every country has a right to enrich. And I also think Iran is worried about the Libya model, what happened in 2003 when the Libyan leader Gaddafi gave up all his nuclear program, and of course only a few years later was attacked by NATO and found himself deposed and killed soon after.
Incremental escalation against its foe has been one U.S. policy for decades now, and of course that's in the back of the heads of many Iranian strategists here. But at this point, as Jamal, I think, explained quite well, the Iranian view is that we don't have a clear position on the part of the United States. We articulated a position that is focused on the nuclear and brought it to the table, as the Iranian diplomats are saying. But at the same time, we hear different voices from the U.S. team. One time it's no bomb policy, another it's no enrichment, and voices about Iran's ballistic missiles program, its regional policy, its foreign policy, etc. So the fluctuation there is really frustrating. You don't have a clear position on the other side. But when it comes to Iran, it's clear we will trade transparency and limits, as it is said by many Iranian officials, for sanctions relief. And that was done back in 2015. Iran has shown that it's not willing to go for weaponization, and it expects for return sanctions relief. That's the entirety of the Iranian position. The mismatch with the American position, which fluctuates, is really something that troubled the previous discussions, the 5 rounds that preceded the war, and now it's troubling it again, because every time, as we hear from diplomats here, every time the U.S. team comes to the room, they're as if we didn't have discussions before. It's reset, and that's frustrating, and it's really impeding progress.
Richard, you've watched lots and lots of diplomatic processes over the years. What do you think about the way this is being carried out? Because there have only been in this round 2 pretty short meetings, and these are very, very complex subjects, particularly if you want to look beyond just the nuclear program. And even the nuclear program is terribly technical. And yet these are short meetings, the latest one only about 3 hours. And the US team, Mr. Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, managed to do this in Geneva, slotting it in on the same day as talks regarding Ukraine and Russia.
Yes, this is, I think this is a feature of the Trump's administration foreign policy, relying on a few key envoys and empowering them. It's been done sometimes in the past. Henry Kissinger had a lot of authority to negotiate deals, and that sometimes worked well. There's of course problems on the Iranian side as well, in that for a long time the Iranians refused to deal directly with the U.S. They had to go through intermediaries, and so that delayed things. I think, given the importance of the issue and the fact that the advisors to the president are giving diverse views, which we discussed, I think it's really going to take a decision by President Trump on what he wants, and that to be will reflect what's given to him by his advisors, what we get from the Iranians in the next few days. And I think then once he reaches a decision, it'll be focusing on implementation. And that may be easier. We've been discussing this problem for 20 years, or a lot of creative solutions about multilateral enrichment, multilateral discussions to deal with some of the missile and proxy issues, bringing in the GCC states, so on. So there's a lot of material out there that we can draw on. There just needs to be a decision about what is going to be the joint goal the 2 sides want, and then the execution should be not as difficult as perhaps previous rounds.
Jamal, as Richard says, all sorts of ideas have been floating around. Enrichment outside the country, some sort of consortium of regional countries doing the enrichment. Those don't seem to be acceptable to Iran. Iran's coming up with its own plan. The senior security official, Ali Larijani, is presenting something we understand very, very soon. But my question is, what do you think President Trump will accept? And it's got to be something that looks very different from the 2015 deal, which he said was an awful deal.
Yeah, of all the unpredictable characters and issues, it's Donald Trump and the Iran nuclear issue. So predicting what he will accept is probably pretty difficult. I know that, what the discussions are, at least publicly, is that there is a proposal for Iran to have a token level of enrichment. So under the JCPOA, Iran was allowed to enrich up to 3% and eventually increase its enrichment levels. What's being talked about is something like 1.5%. which would satisfy the Iranian concern about maintaining this fundamental right to enrichment. But whether that actually addresses the concerns of the United States and Israel about just Iran having a capability to enrich is really pretty uncertain. And I think that one of the features of these talks that maybe actually is an asset to getting a deal is the fact that Iran is not currently, as far as we know, currently enriching uranium. Because of the June war, Iran's stockpile is likely buried under, a mountain of rubble. This, for the parties at the table, could be useful to be able to say, okay, we're going to continue to not enrich for some time period and then have a token level of enrichment so that Iran has that right. But then for Trump, you have something that Obama did not obtain through his talks, which is some sort of suspension of enrichment. I don't know if that's on the table or if it's even possible, but there are new dynamics here that I think allow the parties to find ways to potentially satisfy their bottom lines. And it is really a question for Trump. Is no enrichment his bottom line? Because if it is, this has been a position that has prevented the United States from resolving this issue for many years. And it wasn't until Obama came in and said, we're actually going to compromise on that one issue. That is what unlocked the JCPOA and unlocked the ability for the parties to reach a deal. So if Trump is able to do that, I think that there are kind of a multitude of ways to sort of satisfy the Iranian bottom line, but also satisfy American concerns about weaponization and ensuring that Iran does not have a path to weaponization.
Hassan, you'll be aware that President Trump came into office with a campaign saying he didn't want to fight any more foreign wars, and yet you've got this massive build-up of military air power and naval power just off the coast of Iran. Perhaps Trump emboldened by what happened last year, but also Venezuela. I mean, let me ask you this question. Is there a Venezuela model in this that Trump might try to remove the Ayatollah and keep the government in Tehran? And would that ever work?
Well, I think they've tried it already many times in the past few decades. I don't think that would work because Iran's military and security apparatuses have been acting independently for 5 decades. We don't have American boots on or presence in the country, and we don't have Israeli presence. I mean, of course, spies might be, but presence in the sense of the official presence, as the companies were in Venezuela, for instance, they weren't here. I don't think the Iranian political system is that weak for that model to work. I can give you many reasons why I think so, but I mean, it's basically not really comparable in my mind. But generally, what concerns the Iranians is not that model. It concerns them that this basically standoff can escalate into a conflict. They prefer diplomacy, but they are not willing to give everything for that sake. They want diplomacy to work in a give and take way, not in a capitulation way. And it boils down really to whether the United States wants a no bomb policy vis-a-vis Iran, or it wants all Israeli priorities in Iran. If the latter is the case, I'm afraid there won't be a deal, and we are up for a confrontation. And that's the most concerning thing, not really the Venezuela model or any other model in Iran.
Richard, by some estimates, 40 to 50% of deployable US air power is now directed towards Iran. Does that tell you anything about the timeline for this? Because one assumes you can't just keep all those forces there indefinitely.
Well, there isn't an urgent imperative in the military sense. I would disagree with you there because as discussed, Iran is not going to get a nuclear weapon soon. Its missile and other forces have been weakened by the June war and will not soon be rebuilt. And there's not another security crisis. So if there would look like China was going to invade Taiwan or something else, which would force a timeline, need to reposition the U.S. forces at some point. That might drive it. But President Trump showed a lot of patience in Venezuela, keeping large numbers of forces there for months. I think that he can take time to see the negotiation process go further, and he doesn't need to execute an urgent military operation. That said, there are a number of forces there. He has a lot of military options, and he can implement them fairly quickly if he decides it's necessary. But I don't think he's made that decision yet.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you to our guests today, Richard Weitz, Hassan Ahmadian, and Jamal Abdi. For more background context and analysis on this story, check out our website, aljazeera.com. We'd like to know what you think too. Post your comments on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can find us on X. Just look for @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, James Bays, from the team here in Doha. Stay safe and well. Bye-bye for now.
Today on the Playbook podcast, all eyes on Iran. Is Donald Trump about to take the biggest risk of his second term? The fallout from Friday's tariff ruling continues, and the USA wins gold in the men's ice hockey. But who's celebrating in the locker room? Dasha, how are you doing?
I'm so glad to be back. Oh my gosh, I was knocked out last week, you guys. It was miserable. I'm so sick of sixth season. I'm sick of winter. And this weather right now is not helping me get any better. Oh, by the way, it is Monday, February 23rd.
It is Monday, February 23rd. And by the way, this is Jack Blanchard. And that is Dasha Burns. And Dasha is back with us, as you can hear. And so is the snow, Dasha. The snow is back. Are you happy?
I'm feeling better just in time. I am not happy. I'm not happy. I'm really over it.
If you're in DC today, the federal agencies are open, but under a 2-hour delay, and so are the schools. I'm delighted. My kids are thrilled. They can hang out at home until 10:30. But we're not getting weeks of snowcrete again. Temperatures will be up to the mid-50s by Wednesday, Dasha. So do not fear. This is a day or two of snow and no more. So you'll be all right.
Okay. I'll hang in there.
You don't look totally convinced, but that's what we've got.
We'll see.
I was trying to think of what's of a good heading for Playbook this morning, and I came up with one battle after another, because Donald Trump goes directly from his Friday tariff meltdown, if I can put it in those terms, and the biggest story dominating the weekend. We're now starting a new week, and it's all about Iran, because is he going to do it, Dasha? What do you think?
Yeah, one battle after another. My pick for the Oscars, by the way. I was speaking yesterday with some people close to the White House and some Pentagon officials. And, the challenge with speculating what the president is going to do with foreign policy is immense in this administration, because we have seen so much buildup and then no action, build up and then no action, build up and then something happens, very little buildup, and then something huge happens. So one defense official that I was speaking to yesterday told me that there have been multiple times just in the last few weeks or couple of months that they have left the building thinking that they were going to come back at 3 a.m. because something was going to happen, and then woke up to their regular alarm being like, oh, I guess we decided not to go through with that. And that is the story of the Trump approach to war and peace.
So it's so true. It's so true. Let me try and read the runes a little bit, which, as you say, is an intensely dangerous thing to do with Donald Trump. But that is what you guys listen to us for. Obviously, we have this colossal military buildup in the Middle East. It's a big deal. America does not normally do things like this without taking action. That's the first really important thing to bear in mind. If you listen to Donald Trump at the back end of last week, he said to Iran, we're going to make a deal, or we're going to get to a deal one way or another. He said 10, 15 days. Now, we've heard that from him before. He was saying that right up until the minute he sent the bombers over to Iran last time. So I'm taking that sort of timeline with a pinch of salt. The one that really interested me over the weekend, Dasha, Steve Witkoff on Fox News on Saturday, saying that Iran could be, quote, a week away from having, quote, industrial grade bomb making material. Now, I have no idea whether that's true or not, but the fact that he put that timescale on it, a week away, sounded very much like someone rolling the pitch for action this week. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen, but that was my message I took from it.
Well, they've really kept up the urgency here. And there is, let's remember, Steve Witkoff is in regular contact with Israel, with Bibi Netanyahu, and with the Israeli government, who are very eager to see the U.S. take action here. Netanyahu was in the White House just last week, of course, having those very conversations. So there are a lot of reasons why Wickoff in particular, but a number of officials both in the U.S. and over in Israel would want to keep up the sort of immediacy of potential action. And look, we've talked about this before, but Iran is unique in the president's mind. It really is in a lot of ways his white whale. It's the foreign policy that he has held the longest and has been most consistent on, and would be the kind of thing that when he's thinking about legacy would be the kind of thing that he wants. In the history books and during his second term, everything that I am hearing from the people close to him is that, like, yeah, this is very much on the table. The talks are happening pretty consistently, and buckle up, basically.
Buckle up, exactly. And we're expecting more talks in Geneva on Thursday, is currently what has been scheduled, we are told. But there is some thought that maybe Donald Trump does something limited before that to try and move things along a bit.
I wouldn't count talks on the calendar as any indication that we're not going to see something sooner or later. Right now, from my understanding, the main sort of debate or the big question mark is like the scope and scale, and of course timeline. But whether it's if they took action, whether it would be a more sort of targeted strike, or the idea of regime change is something that the administration does want to pursue sooner than later, given the conversation about nuclear, given the conversation about protests, and all the horrible headlines that we've seen coming out of the action against civilians in that country.
People are saying to the president, you have Iran in a historically weak position. There is a moment here if you want to take it. Israel has destroyed the defenses. We saw that, destroyed the proxies. Iran has not been this weak for years, if not decades. They really are. There is not that much Iran can do compared to, say, a few months ago, a few years ago, certainly. And President Trump has people in his ear telling him that. And as you say, for something he wanted to address, they're saying, well, this is it, man. If you want to do it, now is the moment.
And for something like this, it's a whole lot easier to get Trump's ear and talk him into doing something than to talk him off the ledge and to keep him from doing something. And that there are people whose calls he takes, like Senator Lindsey Graham, like Benjamin Netanyahu, like other more hawkish members of his cabinet, that are egging him on here.
Congress was supposed to be back today. It's not back today because of the snow. They'll be back tomorrow. There were plans, and as far as we know, there are still plans to tee up some sort of war powers resolution vote on Iran. Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, of course, the guys that pushed through the Epstein files law at the back end of last year, are now pushing ahead with a war powers resolution vote. It doesn't look like they've got the numbers at the moment, though. Rather surprisingly to me, some of the Republicans who voted with them last time there was a war powers vote are saying they will not vote for this. I saw one Democrat over the weekend, Josh Gottheimer, saying he won't vote for it either, which suggests to me that maybe the numbers aren't there in the House to restrict Trump's.
I think Iran is a very different story. The polling out there is a little bit confusing and it's more nuanced, and I've been seeing a lot of moderate Republicans on social media arguing that the president can do this, should do this, in fact. And when the moderate Republicans are in that space, and the super Trumpy guys are going to be all for whatever he wants to do, that's when this is probably not gonna work out for Massie and Khanna.
Just one more to throw your way on this. It pivots nicely into the other topic I wanted to talk about, which is tariffs. Wilbur Ross, who, as you remember, was the Commerce Secretary back in the first term for Trump, he said on Friday, I don't think Trump can take this loss on tariffs and then be seen to be backing down on Iran. So his view was that just like politically and almost like psychologically, having had that bad defeat in the Supreme Court Friday, does that make it more likely Trump feels he needs to come and be more aggressive in a different policy area?
Oh, that's been a major conversation because, of course, the way that Trump views this and his advisors view this, I mean, all of these narratives are tied together, and when they want the headlines to change, they sometimes take actual policy action. Not that they're, making it up just for the headlines, but like if we were going to do it, might as well do it, when we want to own the narrative. So I'm very curious, like this State of the Union moment and all of what happened last week with the Supreme Court ruling, and a couple of other tough moments for the White House. It feels like we're in limbo right now as we kind of see how all of this weaves together and where that leads us.
Yeah, State of Union, of course, is tomorrow night. We'll talk about that more on the podcast tomorrow morning, I'm sure. But I think like the tariffs is obviously going to be a theme of that speech. If he doesn't do anything on Iran before tomorrow night, then he could probably leave that out of it. But the tariffs just seems to sort of hang over everything. And as the members of Congress come back now tomorrow, they're all going to be talking about that as well. They're going to be asked about it as well. And the message we heard from Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, over the weekend was what they're trying to say, the administration, is that actually this doesn't change anything at all. Don't worry, we've got other plans for tariffs. And I'm just finding that a little hard to believe that really this isn't going to impact on the economy at all.
The impact on the economy is one conversation. Whether or not the administration is going to keep pursuing the tariff agenda is a whole other conversation. I mean, remember when I sat down with Trump's trade chief, Jameson Greer, late last year, he was very adamant that even if the Supreme Court didn't vote their way, that their tariff agenda would press on, that they have other tools to use to keep enacting these tariffs and keep using tariffs as a tool for the economy, for foreign policy, everything that the president has been doing. And that's the message that we're hearing from Scott Bessent as well. And everything I'm hearing from the administration is like they are very committed to not allowing the Supreme Court ruling to really change their trajectory on this. Now, what it actually means in practice, with all of the questions that we still have about whether these, what happens with these refunds, the blue states that are going to be litigating this as hard as they can. I mean, it is actually quite a messy ruling, and that I do think in some ways that the administration thrives in that kind of messiness. Like Trump can use the uncertainty and the muddled waters here to his benefit.
Before we go, I have been enjoying the Winter Olympics a lot over the last couple of weeks. I hope you guys have too.
It has helped me get through my sickness.
I hoped it would. I've been waiting for the moment, because I'm a political nerd, obviously, for the Winter Olympics to get political, for the sort of crossover moment to happen. And we've had one
sicko.
I know. I can't help it. I can't help it. We've had one or two things, but last night, finally, just as the thing is ending, we finally got the crossover.
You got what you
moment.
wanted. You got what you wanted.
After that amazing hockey match, and congratulations to Men's Team USA. Incredible game.
Movies will be made. The man with his teeth knocked out, like doing an interview afterwards, like literally bleeding
everywhere, like a proper hero. Exactly. And coming just a few days after the Team USA women's team did almost exactly the same thing. Amazing to watch. And then in the locker room, who do you see but the head of the FBI with a beer in his hand, chugging back beer, having flown out there in his taxpayer-funded jet. And now we have a political story. What is Kash Patel up to?
I mean, I was looking, of course, on the internet to see the responses to this. And as always, it's like mostly breaking on party lines. Republicans are saying, hey, this was patriotic, and he's, celebrating with the
beer
team.
Drinking.
Yeah, patriotic beer drinking. His spokesperson said that he was there for business, for meetings, like law enforcement stuff, and people are calling that BS. I think the biggest problem for Kash, like, I don't think like the president would normally care, but I do wonder, given the unfortunate timing of him partying in Italy while Mar-a-Lago is getting breached by an armed individual. And of course, there's the Nancy Guthrie case that's still going on. Like, there's actually a ton on the FBI's plate right now, and particularly that threat against the president's property down in Palm Beach.
So anyway, we'll see what happens with Gash Patel today. I'm sure the president will be asked about it when he pops up on the media this morning, and we can see if he wants to give another ringing endorsement to the FBI chief. We better stop there, hadn't we? Dasha, thanks so much for joining us. It's great to have you back.
Thank you.
Thanks all for listening. We've got loads more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter. You can find that at politico.com/playbook. And we'll be back tomorrow for a State of the Union special. Looking forward to it.
Thanks for listening, guys.
I'm national correspondent Kayla Gaskins in Washington. President Trump has handed Iran a deadline to agree to a nuclear deal, threatening bad things will happen if an agreement is not met. President Trump giving Iran what he calls a final window, 10 to 15 days, to strike a nuclear deal with the United States.
We're either going to get a deal or it's going to be unfortunate for them.
Deadline firm to make a deal?
I would think that would be enough time, 10, 15 days. Pretty much maximum.
The end goal for the U.S. is to permanently prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. Trump now throwing the full weight of the U.S. military behind the maximum pressure campaign to force Iran to the negotiating table.
I feel very badly for the people of Iran. They've lived in hell.
Satellite images show what President Trump calls an armada of U.S. forces stationed near Iran. The blue squares represent naval assets, including destroyers and an aircraft carrier. A second is on the way. And the red dots show bases with attack planes and other air power. It's a defense buildup in the Middle East that rivals what the region saw in 2003 before the Iraq invasion. On Friday, we spoke with State Department spokesperson Tommy Pigott. What's spurring such a tight deadline, though, for this deal right now?
Well, the president's a deal maker. He's a peacemaker. You cannot have peace in the Middle East if Iran has a nuclear weapon.
Some are suggesting the ultimate goal behind this military buildup in the Middle East is actually regime change in Iran.
President Trump wants to make a deal.
Some are holding out hope for diplomacy.
What I would like to see is a real effort to try and use the diplomatic track to get to a solution.
Others believe military action is a certainty if diplomacy fails.
I think that window of negotiations is closing, and I think Iran would be wise to make a deal. Otherwise, they're going to face the full force of the United States military.
If anyone doubts what the president says, they just need to look to the last time that the Iranian regime refused to make a deal, and we saw Operation Midnight Hammer.
Are we possibly heading towards World War III, as some fear?
The president has brought about more peace than any president in history.
Defense officials say the buildup will be fully in place by this weekend, but there are reports a more limited strike could come even sooner, targeting Iran's missile capabilities or naval assets. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins. I'm national correspondent Kayla Gaskins here in Washington, and today we have State Department Deputy Principal Spokesperson Tommy Pigott with us. Tommy, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So I want to talk about the Board of Peace. The inaugural meeting happened this week. What do you see as some of the big takeaways from that meeting?
I think the unprecedented global coalition that President Trump's put together. Of course, he did that when the ceasefire was first announced, but this is another step in that direction. All of the world leaders that were there dedicated to implementing the president's peace plan, moving into this phase 2. I think it's also important to reflect on how far we have come. The fact that we have seen aid get into Gaza without it being looted by Hamas. The fact that we've seen hostages be released. The fact that we see the creation of this Board of Peace. Of course, as was outlined in the meeting yesterday, there's still a lot of work to do, but there is tremendous momentum to get this president's peace plan into implementation and to keep moving forward.
A lot was made about the lack of European participation in the Board of Peace at this moment. How important does the State Department see Europe participating in the Board of Peace and, them mainly, largely not being there?
Well, look, I think fundamentally, again, the president is dedicated to putting his principles into action. And his principles here are about getting that advancement of peace. So the president's leadership has brought this support together. We have the UN mandate for the Board of Peace to implement this peace plan in Gaza. We've seen tremendous momentum get there. So of course this will develop over time, but this has only been possible because of the president's leadership, and there has been tremendous progress that has been made.
So the Board of Peace was at least initially created to address Gaza and to address really that regional problem in the Middle East. And some of the major regional players are participating in this board: Egypt, Turkey, Qatar. What is that cooperation like right now as far as the future of Gaza and turning the Gaza Strip into a functioning community that's not filled with terrorism?
Well, as was outlined yesterday, we see a lot of these countries stepping forward in terms of pledges of funding, pledges of personnel, pledges of troops and other different people that will be helping in security. So we've seen these pledges step forward. This has been tremendous progress that's been made, especially from where we've come. So we've seen this cooperation. We've seen people come together, working together under the president's leadership to implement this peace plan, something that people thought was impossible. And I think it's also important to note the fact that when President Trump does this, when he advances the cause of peace here, it's important to the American people as well. Having peace allows prosperity, it allows security, it allows all of our countries to be safer, and that's what the president is so dedicated to.
How close are we to seeing peace in Gaza?
Well, I think as the president said, we're seeing that ceasefire in place. Of course, demilitarization is essential for Hamas. Hamas must demilitarize. That is something that the president has been incredibly clear on. That is the contingency. That's what needs to happen for all these other steps to happen. But the goal here is peace and prosperity. We've made, as I've said, tremendous progress in getting towards that peace and prosperity. We're seeing momentum with the Board of Peace plan announced yesterday, in terms of those different pledges that were made.
Are there any signs Hamas will voluntarily demilitarize?
Well, as the president's made clear, this has been a peace plan that they've agreed to. And that's the expectation that is going to happen.
Moving on to Iran. So the White House maintains last summer's strikes decimated Iran's nuclear program. What is the rush then for the current deadline of 10 to 15 days President Trump is giving Iran to make a nuclear deal?
Well, the president's been clear from the beginning of this administration, even beforehand, about the destabilizing actions we're seeing the Iranian regime take and the fact that those destabilizing actions need to come to an end. We have a maximum pressure policy from our administration that has been bent on denying the Iranian regime the revenue they need to fund those destabilizing activities. That includes that nuclear weapons program. That includes their ballistic missile program. That includes the funding of terrorist proxies across the region. As the president said yesterday during the Board of Peace, you cannot have peace in the Middle East if Iran has a nuclear weapon. It cannot happen. So Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. That's the bottom line. The president is acting to defend our national interests. And I think if anyone doubts what the president says, they just need to look to the last time that the Iranian regime refused to make a deal. And we saw Operation Midnight Hammer. So if anyone doubts that the president means what he says, Operation Midnight Hammer very much proved that he does.
What's spurring such a tight deadline, though, for this deal right now?
Well, the president's a deal maker. He's a peacemaker. The president wants to make sure that the destabilizing actions of the Iranian regime end. That's a direct threat to U.S. troops in the region, U.S. allies in the region, the American people. The president is advancing our national interests, and the force posture that we see in the region is actually reflective of those interests that we have in the region, including those U.S. troops, including our allies in the region. The president is a peacemaker. He's a deal maker. He wants to see a deal happen.
Some are suggesting the ultimate goal behind this military buildup in the Middle East is actually regime change in Iran. What do you have to say to those people?
Well, President Trump wants to make a deal with the Iranian regime. He wants to see them make a deal that stops these destabilizing activities. You have a regime in Iran that, instead of funding water, food, and energy infrastructure, has wasted their vast wealth on these terrorist proxies, on a nuclear weapons program, on a ballistic missile program. The president is defending our national interests. That is the primary goal of this president always, to put America first. He's a peacemaker, he's a deal maker, and he's a defender of America's national interests.
So the U.S. still believes a deal is possible with this regime in Iran?
Well, the president spoke very clearly to this. He said that we want to see a deal, and if they don't make a deal, it'll be very bad for them, as the president said. So he's been very clear on this issue. He wants to see a deal, and if they don't make a deal, it'll be very bad for them.
Are we possibly heading towards World War III, as some fear?
The president has brought about more peace than any president in history, and that's directly benefited the American people. The fact that you see 8 conflicts being ended by this president, and then in conjunction with that, investment from those areas coming back to help the American people, creating jobs, leading to real wage growth, the rebalancing of trade that we've seen, all these things are connected. And so the president has advanced this cause of peace. So I think, quite contrary to your question, we're a much safer world because of the policies that President Trump has put in place. And we're a safer world because we're a stronger America that is racing boldly into the future, not just to recapture the past in terms of industries and other things, but to be well positioned to take advantage of the opportunities that lie ahead of us.
Are there any other diplomatic meetings in the works like we saw in Geneva this past week?
Well, these are ongoing, dynamic conversations. I don't want to preview specifics right now, but what I can say is that the president wants to see a deal, as I've said, and if the Iranian regime refuses a deal, as the president said, it'll be very bad for them.
So lines of communication are still open at this point?
As of now, the president said he wants to see a deal, and that's what the president has said.
All right. Is there anything else, Tommy, you want to add either on Iran or on the Board of Peace before I let you go?
No, I think that just about covers it. I mean, the president is implementing these policies, advancing the cause of peace more than any other president. He always puts America first, and when he does so, the American people directly benefit through safety, prosperity, and being a stronger nation as a whole.
All right. Tommy Pigott with the State Department, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Maybe there are some people here who think they know better than Arabs and Muslims in the region about these two organizations.
Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, leader of the Iranian opposition in exile, the Islamization of the West, demographic replacement. Is this something that concerns you?
And I warned the Europeans many, many years ago that one of these days it's going to be in your own backyard. And guess what? It is not in your own backyard. You can come to a country as a guest, and instead of assimilating and respecting our values and our culture, you're dictating to us that we should now practice the Sharia law in Europe. They'll end up like Iran pretty soon. Nothing good came out of this so-called Sharia law.
The massacre is exceptionally brutal.
Unprecedented in modern history.
36,000 dead.
A regime so desperate that it massacres its own people, that it has to import over 5,000 militias that are not even Iranian nationals, from Lebanon, from Palestine, from Afghanistan, from Iraq, to do the dirty job and Iranian people on the street. That the media doesn't talk about.
What is it that you would actually like Western governments to do in practice?
Number one, come to our help to equalize the playing field for us by taking out and neutralizing the element of repression that the regime is utilizing. That includes the IRGC or any other instance.
So you're advocating for an armed intervention?
Number two, economic strangulation, freezing of their assets and repurposing that towards helping the Iranian people. Expelling their diplomats, closing their embassies, going after them legally and prosecuting those who have been criminally responsible for these acts of crime against humanity. Making sure that Iranians are not disconnected from the world, so access to internet and information is critical. And ultimately be ready to recognize a transitional government that is the legitimate answer, because this regime is on the verge of collapse. It's just a matter of time.
My name is Stefan Thompson. I'm the founder of Visegrad24, and today I'm here with Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, the unofficial or official, to some people, leader of the Iranian opposition in exile. Reza, what a pleasure to be here with you.
It's good to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for your time. We're meeting in very specific circumstances. There has been an insane crackdown. The massacre is exceptionally brutal. Tell us about what is happening to Iran and what it feels like from your perspective.
No words can describe the degree of violence that has occurred. The minimum numbers that we have had was over 36,000 people just in the Tehran area. The numbers could be wider. They don't just end with killing people on the streets. They chase them into hospitals. They finish them off on their hospital beds. There are over 40,000 people who've been arrested, more than 300,000 wounded. Women are being raped in jail. It's really atrocious in terms of the level of violence that has been utilized. Despite that, Iranians are still resilient. They've been chanting slogans from the rooftops every night since that massacre. You have seen a wide level of support for them in the Iranian diaspora worldwide, from Australia to Canada to here in Europe. And everybody is up there backing each other up and supporting each other in this revolt. I mean, we are right now at a state where we are dealing with an occupying force, and everybody is hoping that the world will come to the rescue and deliver us in terms of, a sort of a humanitarian intervention that is necessary. This is the only way that we can find an opportunity to actually rise against a regime that very unfairly has all the advantage of repression, and only the world can help us by equalizing the playing field for us. So everybody's awaiting
some action to be taken sooner rather than later to save lives, in reality, to have less casualties in our struggle for freedom.
Some of the videos that have been emerging from Iran are absolutely horrific, including a video that particularly moved me, was a video of IRGC forces driving a car and literally driving over protesters. Now, these videos have been proliferated on social media, mostly on X, where we've had Iranian diaspora members and dissidents and people who stand against the regime who have been the voice of the people of Iran. What is very marking to me as I watch your struggle and the struggle of the Iranian people against the Islamic regime is that the mainstream media has been broadly silent about the scale of this crackdown. You've just said the figure 36,000 dead just in the Tehran area. Now, the war in Gaza attracted mainstream media attention for 2 years. Tens of protests in every single capital city, every week, every Saturday, hundreds of thousands of people coming out. Why is the mainstream media, in your opinion, not as interested in the plight of the Iranian people as they were in the plight of the people of Gaza?
Indeed, social media has been key to report back to the whole world what's happening on the streets of Iran. And unfortunately, mainstream media has been practically absent from it. Is it because maybe it doesn't fit their narrative in some way? Is there a double standard going on? I leave that to the public opinion's judgment, but clearly it has been quite absent from describing something that has been unprecedented in modern history. Over 30,000 people in less than 2 days being murdered. And yet it seems like that's not a big enough of an issue for mainstream media to cover. And, you know, at some point they'll have to be accountable in a way. Not covering such a tragedy is either complete ignorance or worse, almost like playing to the regime's hand and its instrument of propaganda that has always been masking all their dirty work. A regime so desperate that its total darkness massacres its own people. A regime so desperate and weak that it has to import over 5,000 militias that are not even Iranian nationals, from Lebanon, from Palestine, from Afghanistan, from Iraq, to do the dirty job and kill Iranian people on the street. That the media doesn't talk about. I think many Iranians like me are quite frustrated by what should be the most obvious thing for a reporter to do is just to report the news. Hopefully they'll catch up to it and, wise up to understanding that it is a moral obligation to cover this. As a journalist, you could not be oblivious to this level of genocide.
There have been a number of protests organized by the diaspora. Some very moving images outside of embassies, the lion and sun flag flying. Every time I see it, I get slightly moved. My family was in exile. I'm half Polish and my family was also in exile. So your plight is sort of familiar to my family story in and of itself. So I find it emotional from that perspective. The diaspora is bringing attention to the horrors happening in Iran today. What is it that you would want the Western world to do to actually help the Iranian people? Telling the story is one thing. Getting the images out is something that even people like me can do. But what is it that you would actually like Western governments to do in practice?
When you have leaders beginning to take a very strong stance, example, Chancellor Merkel, that talks about this regime having lost complete legitimacy. Well, when a system becomes illegitimate, then you have to, by the same logic, say, well, what is therefore legitimate? Is it the aspiration of the Iranian people that finally needs to be acknowledged? Because for 40 years, the West has, in essence, conducted a foreign policy of appeasement with the hope that somehow this regime will change its behavior and will become reasonable enough to come to the negotiating table and stop its strategy of unleashing radicalism and extremism and terrorism regionally and beyond. That hasn't happened. Meanwhile, we are where we are today as a result of a regime that has always been thrown a lifeline for 4 decades and to this day haven't shown any resemblance of the ability to transform itself into something other than what it is. And it cannot, because as I say, what they are doing is in their DNA. They are not compatible with the democratic free world that respects human rights, that values individual liberties, that protects the right of minorities, religious, ethnic. This is a regime that has basically been there only to export an ideology at the detriment of the Iranian people and against the interest of the free world. So when we look at the free world, what do we expect them to do? Number one, you can certainly help us by making sure that Iranians who are defenseless and unarmed vis-a-vis such level of brutality come to our help to equalize the playing field for us by taking out and neutralizing the element of repression that the regime is utilizing. That includes the IRGC or any other instance.
So you're advocating for an armed intervention?
That is a humanitarian intervention because the instrument that kills people on the streets can no longer be tolerated by the world. And it's not the first time it happens. I mean, sometimes wars ended on the result of intervention of that nature. Example, Second World War.
Sure.
You know that very well as somebody from Poland. Number two, economic strangulation in terms of any revenue that the regime is utilizing to fund and keeps its war machine going on. Freezing of their assets and repurposing that towards helping the Iranian people in their various campaigns from labor strikes and others, for instance. Expelling their diplomats, closing their embassies, going after them legally and prosecuting those who have been criminally responsible for these acts of crime against humanity. They can also do more in terms of making sure that Iranians are not disconnected from the world, so access to internet and information is critical. And that will be an instrument that will be of tremendous help for us in every phase of the game. And ultimately be ready to recognize a transitional government that is the legitimate answer to the aspiration of the Iranian people against a regime that has lost complete legitimacy. These are the kind of tangible steps that I think the world can take to help us. And at the end of the day, they will realize that this is in fact not just because it's good for the Iranian people, but it's good for their own interests as well.
One of the things that is misunderstood perhaps about Iran is how influential that country is in the Middle East and what role it has played, including in the Israel-Hamas war. The Israelis weren't just fighting against Hamas, they were fighting against a number of proxies. Could you tell us more about the role that Iran plays as a destabilizing force in the Middle East?
Well, again, the regime trying to establish its modern-day Shiite caliphate and export it to the world is using a lot of its proxies to conduct that. So whether it is their support for Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis, for instance, and all the way to European soil and even the Western Hemisphere, having terrorist organization or having sleeper cells that are funded by structures that are directly linked to Khamenei, the supreme leader, targeting, for instance, British citizens on British soil.
Could you give us some examples, Reza, of the operations that Iran has carried out in Western nations to destabilize Western nations?
Well, in fact, I presented in detail the whole mapping of the structures and institutions that are disguised as so-called foundations or centers that are directly under the authority of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, who operates on European soil, in this case in Britain, and how they're targeting British citizens, the Jewish community, journalists, dissidents, and what have you. And they have that spread out. That's not even before we start talking about the money laundering operations that they also have. And a lot of it, again, ties to the IRGC and why the prescription of the IRGC keeps popping up as one measure that needs to be taken. That's a subject in itself. But these are the kind of ways that the regime so far has conducted to undermine regional stability and, you know, by its proxy war, achieve two things. A, create that instability that they thrive on, but also to deflect attention from themselves. Every time there was an issue, they would deflect attention either to Syria or to Lebanon or to Gaza or to Israel or to any other thing to deflect attention from themselves. That has been a tactic that the regime has used for decades.
There has been some claims, and allegedly there is evidence that would link the IRGC and some of the gangs that operate in Europe, even on the basis of sort of armed robberies, drug dealing. Is this something that you're aware of, Reza?
They've extended that all the way to Latin America. I mean, part of the connection that the regime in Tehran had with Caracas and, of course, also with Cuba has been one of those axes that a lot of people in Venezuela could tell you about. The footprint of the IRGC all the way in the Western Hemisphere. And this is not something new. Some of the attacks that were carried out against, let's say, the synagogue in Argentina, that was another operation that was launched by the regime, again, targeting the Jewish community. There are so many examples over the 4 decades that you can demonstrate the pattern of behavior. And this is not just an incident. This is actually part of their entire strategy to intimidate the region and keep all of us hostage in the process.
The United States of America in several states has moved to ban and designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a proscribed terrorist organization. The European Union has been stalling on declaring both the IRGC and the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorist organizations. Why do you think that Europeans are stalling on this, especially given that a large selection of majority Muslim countries, including the UAE, Jordan, Saudi, Egypt, have designated and prescribed the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization? Why is Europe stalling on this?
Maybe there are some people here who think they know better than Arabs and Muslims in the region about these two organizations.
Is that it, you reckon?
Can I find another answer to the question?
I don't know. Perhaps they're being, bribed, corrupted, or perhaps they're incredibly naive. I'm not sure.
Well, I think it's at the end of the day some degree of naivete, not understanding the scope of what it really means. Because, a lot of people that have not been direct witness of the level of atrocity or radicalism and extremism and hatred and bigotry and that exists, that is embedded in that ideology, would not comprehend it unless they spend just a day of living in Iran to understand what is really going on, how this ideology is poisonous, it's toxic, it's beyond radiation if you had a nuclear meltdown. It is that devastating. And I think that you are beginning to see the consequences of that radicalism and extremism manifesting itself now on European soil itself. That level of extremism, of radical Islam, is beginning to be felt in Europe. And I warned the Europeans many, many years ago that it will eventually end in your own backyard. I remember a conversation I had with a member of the House of Lords in the early 80s. And I said, the way Europe looks at the Middle East is like a far distant area. It doesn't affect us. They're fighting each other over there. And I remember telling him, this is probably 1982, that one of these days it's going to be in your own backyard. And guess what? It is now in your own backyard. And unfortunately, there's a certain angle of thinking here, mostly the leftists. The minute you say that, they say, oh, you're Islamophobic. Do you think that people in Saudi Arabia or in the UAE or in Iran, when they talk about radical Islam, they are Islamophobic? They are Muslims. Can't you tell the difference? And when you call something for what it is, you've been accused of painting them the wrong way. That's the kind of hypocrisy and double standard that exists. But the reality is that, yes, the Muslim Brotherhood or the Islamic regime are fomenting extremism, radicalism, hatred, bigotry, and discrimination. That's the essence of their ideology. What we want as Iranians is a country where we can guarantee every single citizen of Iran, irrespective of their ethnicity, their religious beliefs, or political affiliation, justice and equality under the law, putting an end to any form of discrimination that this regime has been the root cause of. And it's not just us being affected, it's affecting many others around the world. That is not the direction to go. And it is, for us, when we look at the West, what do we look at the West for? We're not looking to Beijing, we're not looking to Moscow, we're looking to the West. Why? Because these are the established democracies where we assume these liberties and these values are in fact cherished and protected. But why is it that when it comes to countries like ours, all of a sudden, it's no longer a question of human rights. It's a question of, well, maybe they think differently. Maybe we should try to understand them. This is what they were saying at the beginning. Let's try to understand them. They may be different. We have to be able to believe in that. I'm sorry, but bigotry is bigotry. Radicalism is radicalism. You cannot discriminate discrimination.
It's the Karl Popper paradox, the tolerance of the intolerant. One of the things that really marked me over the last few months was seeing a poster of the Supreme Leader, the Ayatollah, held by a leftist in a keffiyeh at a demonstration in London, and the poster that she had said, be on the right side of history? What stage have we reached if we've got these radicals who side with the Islamic regime over and above the protesters that are being massacred? How do you feel about what some people are describing as the Islamization of the West? There has been wave after wave of mass migration. Many of those have come from majority Muslim countries. Do you think that warning that you issued to that lord in the 1980s, is that coming true in terms of demographic replacement as well? Is this something that concerns you, of sort of losing them as ideological allies? Is this something that you're concerned with?
Well, I would hate to see a scenario whereby we will settle for things have to get worse before they start getting better. In that light, let's say, for instance, that you are one of these Western countries. I will use one example specifically only because there's a reason I'm bringing this up. Belgium, let's say. So I know this gentleman who actually wrote a book about Iran, who is doing some research as well as some teaching, and he was telling me that my apartment is 1 mile away from the Royal Palace in Brussels. Yet in my own district, there are some Islamists that are pushing legislation to conduct not only the Sharia law, but to segregate buses so women and men ride in separate buses. In Brussels. Now I ask you as a European, have we come to a point where this country says not only you can come to a country as a guest, and instead of assimilating and respecting our values and our culture, you're dictating to us that we should now practice the Sharia law in Europe and incorporate it into the system? If that's the way Europe wants to end up like, then honestly, I'm lost for words. If that's where we have to get to that point. What I'm telling you is that Iranians, and I know many other countries in the region, are desperate to liberate themselves from this extremism, from this radicalism. That nothing good came out of this so-called Sharia law. Because in the name of Sharia law, the first thing that Khomeini did was to undo what the previous regime had brought in terms of equality, women and their rights with the family law plan. That was the first thing that they abolished. And then everything took a downturn. This is the consequence of a regime that was advocating Sharia law. We know how disastrous it's been. Just look at Iran and the state of affairs there. And now you think that's just a good example to follow for Europeans? Because they'll end up like Iran pretty soon. The writing is on the wall. And all you need to do is to ask the people who have actually endured it to tell you what it actually means. I don't want the Europeans to end up being where Iranians are today only to discover what it actually means. I'm just trying to save you time. But if you insist on that, so be it. But then you have only yourselves to blame.
Reza, as we come to the end of this interview, we've talked a lot about facts. But you are an Iranian. You are the son of the Shah. You are the Crown Prince. You are one of the main figures of the Iranian opposition. What do you feel when you see these images coming out of your home country? How does it feel to be in exile away from your people as they face this great tragedy?
Well, it's not that I like to live in exile. I was forced to live in exile. I wouldn't be alive today if I were back in Iran. They would have eliminated me, and I'm not good being dead to anyone.
No.
So it was a matter of survival. But the nation is not calling me. They're calling my name. They want me to lead this transition. They have faith in me. They have trust in me. They know that for 47 years, I stood the course. I stood committed to my values. I told them that's what all I want for Iran is to have a secular democratic system to replace this religious dictatorship. Iran and Iranians deserve better than that. A country with such level of history, such level of culture, such level of talent. I mean, look at the world today. Yes, many Iranians had to be forced to exile as well or migrate. Most of them are running the show in many of these countries as successful entrepreneurs, doctors, scientists, and they would have preferred to do that back home. But their only crime was they were either Jewish or Baha'i or Muslims or maybe a member of the LGBTQ community or even atheist, and they couldn't be in their country as a result of immediate persecution. That's what I say. Iran deserves so much better, and we proved it before. Iran was there. Iran was one of the most successful growing economies in the Middle East. Other countries will come to take model out of Iran. The Korean delegations would visit Iran. From other countries, they will visit Iran. Our GDP was 5 times that of North Korea at the time. Today, we've become South Korea. We can't even compete with the first 150 economies of the world, although we have gas and oil, Iran and its potential. That's not what Iran deserves to have. And as an Iranian, you know, I'm passionate about, and I'm not talking about blind nationalism. You know, we are in a real world. We like to be able to be friends with our neighbors. We have that kind of relationship so long as it's based on mutual respect and, you know, fair trade. But I think Iran can do so much better, and we've proven it before, and I know we can do it 10 times better if only the opportunity is given to us. And I think the opportunity will come soon, because this regime is on the verge of collapse. It's just a matter of time. What can expedite its collapse is for the world this time to take strong stance with the Iranian people and help us bring together a regime that has been no good to anyone but only its own survival, and is willing to do anything, including killing tens of thousands of people just to survive. This cannot fly anymore. So as an Iranian, we'll do whatever we have to do. And I'm the first one to tell my fellow compatriots, we cannot rely on anybody else than ourselves. However, it will be so much better with less loss of life and much faster if indeed the world decides to this time stand on the right side of history, meaning on the side of liberating a nation that deserves better, and against an evil ideology that has been so destructive at home and abroad. This is what's at stake, and this is a moment in time where history can change for the better. So as Iranians, we will fight our fight. We are not waiting for America or Europe to do anything. We're just telling them, why don't you think of Iranians as your best partners post-regime? We will be there to make sure that the world is a safer place. We will be there to make sure that there's an immediate end to radicalism and terrorism and nuclear threats and whatever else that the world is preoccupied with. We'll be able to provide an opportunity for our nation and your country to flourish and benefit economically, to have a better future for our next generations. We'll be able to provide Europe with the security of energy dependence that right now is only being controlled by Russia mostly. Iran can provide Europe with this energy. Iran can reverse the trend of migration and more migration as a result of the status quo continuing that will already flood an already saturated Europe and what have you. Plus, we will eliminate all this radicalism that is now affecting European communities as well. And so on and so forth. There are so many more things at stake here than just talking about the principle of liberty. Nobody disagrees with that. But for God's sakes, let's cut the double standard and the hypocrisy. This is your opportunity to tell the Iranian people, we're with you and not against you. That's our expectation in a very pragmatic way. And we will remember. We will remember who was with us in these hard times and who wasn't. It's as simple as that.
I wish you and the Iranian people all the very best. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Professor Lucas, after a deadly January crackdown, we've seen students are back on the streets over the weekend. What do these demonstrations tell us about the state of public sentiment in Iran today?
Well, I think it tells us what I've long heard from friends inside Iran, and I'm privileged to have many of them, which is the idea of fire under the ashes, that they do want change, whether that's reforms, whether that's actually a replacement of the regime. They want more political, social space. They want to be able to live without intimidation, without the fear of being arrested or killed. And despite the regime killing thousands, maybe tens of thousands of Iranians last month, people will still make this known. Now, I must emphasize at this point that these, unlike the protests that started in late December, which started in the markets and in the bazaars, these look like they're just at the university campuses for the moment. It doesn't look like we've got a widespread movement across all sectors of Iranian society like we did have last month. But it is a symptom that Iran is never a case where the opposition is in a place to get rid of the regime, but it's never in a place where the regime has completely put down the Iranian wish to try to have respect for their rights and for justice.
And with the 40-day mourning period over protests that are gathering momentum and U.S. forces that we see massing up in the region, does the government, you think, Professor Lucas, will it double down on repression, or do you think it'll act more carefully now?
Well, I think the regime made it very clear last month, specifically on January 8th and 9th, after the late son of the Shah, Reza Pahlavi, had called for protest on the streets because he would like to return to power. The regime made clear it's not going to tolerate widespread protest, and it will unleash military force to put this down. No one should be under any illusion of that. At the same time, I think the idea that a U.S. attack on the regime would open up the way for the protesters is badly misguided, because as soon as the U.S. attacks, the regime will try to rally support by going to Iranians and saying, look, we're not your enemy. The U.S. and Israel are. We saw that during Israel's 12-day war last June, when the regime was able to command support and push back protest. And I think if the Trump camp were foolish enough to go in with widespread airstrikes, it will actually undercut those Iranian protests.
And continuing on the topic of protests, how might these renewed protests inside Iran actually influence the government's willingness to negotiate or not with the U.S.?
Well, right now, the Iranian regime is just trying to buy time. They do not want to be attacked by the United States. They do not want to face a case where the mass protests put them under threat of being removed. So they're going to say, look, we'll talk, we'll negotiate. That's what was repeated by the foreign ministry today. That's why we have an announcement of another round of talks, which I believe are going to be in the Gulf. How much time can the Iranian regime buy? Not only versus the United States, but versus its own people. I think you go back to the fundamental factor that triggered the mass protest in December, and that's the Iranian economy. Given the plummeting currency, given the high rate of inflation, given the collapses of key banks in Iran, given the mismanagement of the economy, I think if you have another shock, another economic shock that affects many Iranians, that's what will really spur the protest, even with the threat of repression.
And Iran and the U.S. will meet for another round, as we've been reporting, of talks on Thursday again. So what do you think, Professor Lucas? Do you think there will be a deal, or do you think we're closer to peaceful resolution, perhaps? Or do you think we're closer to a broader conflict?
Right now, we're in a limbo. We've had talks about talks. That's what we've had so far. Whether or not we have got a defined agenda, that's something I'll be looking for on Thursday. Whether that agenda gets to the heart of issues around nuclear enrichment, around whether or not Iran's ballistic missile program will be discussed, and around verification through the International Atomic Energy Agency, as well as the issue of sanctions. Let's see if those are on the table. I think the Iranians would like to put those on the table. I think they do want to find a way out of this. Is the Trump administration actually going to be willing to come off of the position of zero enrichment? Are they going to insist that Iran has to give up its ballistic missile program or limit it? Because if they do either of those, these talks will go nowhere.
It looks like in any negotiation, someone's going to have to compromise, right? Thank you, Professor Scott Lucas, for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank your viewers.
יום שני ברציפות של מחאות באיראן ועימותים אלימים באוניברסיטאות. בבירת טהרן ובמשהד, העיר השנייה בגודלה במדינה, חזרו הסטודנטים מחופשת הסמסטר, ולפי דיווחים הפכו הקמפוסים לזירות קרב של ממש. באחד התיעודים נראים סטודנטים מתעמתים עם אנשי הבסיס שהגיעו לפזר את ההפגנה. באוניברסיטת שריף בטהרן, רגע סמלי במיוחד, סטודנטים הניפו את דגל איראן של לפני המהפכה האסלאמית וזכו לתשואות.
اعتراضات در یکی دو شهر ایران شروع شده و در چند دانشگاه ایران که دانشگاه صنعتی شریف و دانشگاه امیرکبیر که جزو معتبرترین دانشگاه‌های دنیا هستند. ولی این آدمای مزدوران جمهوری اسلامی به حدی وحشی هستند، اون به حدی این وحشتناک ترسناکن که اونها رو میکشن و میدزدن، بازداشت میکنن، سربنیست میکنن و تظاهرات در نطفه خفه میکنن.
ההתלקחות הנוכחית מגיעה אחרי ימים רגישים במיוחד, עם פתיחת הסמסטר ותום תקופת 40 ימי האבל על נרצחי המחאות.
از یک گوشه کنار با ترس زدم تو هنجرش.
בעיר הקורדית אבדנן שבמערב איראן נשמעו שוב הקריאות המוכרות נגד המשטר. וגם אם היקף ההפגנות לא נראה המוני בשלב הזה, אלא נקודתי, החזרה לרחובות לאחר הדיכוי הקטלני בחודש שעבר מעידה על עומק הזעם, כשברקע ממשיכות לנשב רוחות המלחמה.
هر لحظه منتظرشیم که حمله کنه، هر لحظه، هر ثانیه، هر دقیقه. ما اصلا زندگیامو به هم ریخته. ما هر لحظه منتظریم حمله کنه.
ובזמן שהמשטר מנסה להציג חזית של עמידה בלחץ ומצהיר שלא ייכנע, הקמפוסים באיראן חושפים מציאות אחרת. חברה זועמת, רעבה למקמה וממתינה לשינוי. יש מי שמעדיף שהדחיפה לשינוי תגיע דווקא מישראל.
خوبی اسرائیل اینه که در جنگ 12 روزه چرا نتانیاهو شد محبوب ترین آدم ایران؟ چون که نقطه زن سران آشغال به در نخور جمهوری اسلامی رو کشت و مردم لذت بردن و مردم عادی نکشت، غیر نظامی نکشت، جاهای اقتصادی رو نزد، فقط مزدوران سپاه پاسداران رو کشت. ای کاش میشد که فقط اسرائیل حمله کنه، چون که نقطه زن مزدوران جمهوری اسلامی رو به درک واصل میکنه.
גם כעת איש אינו יודע כיצד תיראה הרפובליקה האסלאמית בעתיד, גם זה הקרוב. מה שברור הוא שהכעס הגדול ממשיך לבעבע מתחת לפני השטח, וההתפרצות הגדולה הבאה היא רק עניין של זמן.
בזמן שהאזור כולו נערך למלחמה, באפיק הדיפלומטי נראה שאין פריצת דרך.
I don't want to use the word frustrated. It's almost because he understands he's got plenty of alternatives. But it's curious. He's curious as to why they haven't, I don't want to use the word capitulated, but why they haven't capitulated.
הצדדים אמורים להיפגש שוב עוד השבוע. לפי דיווחים היום, טהרן תשקול ברצינות הוצאת חלק מהאורניום המואשר משטחה, דילול של יתר המלאי, וכן קונסורציום אזורי להמשך העשרת אורניום. זו הצעה שהאיראנים כבר הניחו על השולחן בעבר, אך לא התקבלה. בוושינגטון לא סומכים על טהרן שיכולות העשרה יישמרו רק למטרות אזרחיות.
Yet they've been enriching well beyond the number that you need for civil nuclear. It's up to 60%. They're probably a week away from having industrial grade bomb-making material.
התשובה לשאלה מהי מטרת העל של וושינגטון עדיין לא לגמרי ברורה. בארצות הברית הצהירו בשבוע האחרון כי המטרה היא תוכנית הגרעין של איראן, אבל נראה שגם שינוי משטר עומד אולי על הפרק.
Has he been part of any of this? Have you guys had any conversations with him?
Well, I've met him. At the direction of the president. I actually, it's public. It's out there. I think he's strong for his country, cares about his country, but this is going to be about President Trump's policies, not Mr. Pahlavi's policies.
בינתיים בצד השני בטוחים שהתקיפה תתרחש ולא משנה מה תהיה תוצאת המשא ומתן, אבל טוענים שאפשר עדיין להגיע להסכם.
If they want to find a resolution for Iran's peaceful nuclear program, the only way is diplomacy. And we have proved this in the past, and I believe that still there is a good chance to have a diplomatic solution which is based on a win-win game, and a solution is at our reach. So there is no need for any military build-up, and military build-up cannot help it and cannot pressurize us.
תוכנית הטילים הבליסטיים, אגב, לא נמצאת על השולחן.
So, right now we are negotiating only nuclear.
'Cause 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 ' בשלב הזה טראמפ שומר את הקלפים קרוב לחזה עד הרגע האחרון. ביום שלישי הקרוב נאום מצב האומה השנתי, האם הוא יגיע כנשיא השלום שהוא שואף להיות, או כנשיא שהתחיל עוד מלחמה.
In that news conference, President Trump warned that the Iranian government had better negotiate a fair deal, as he put it, as he considers it military force. It comes as a second US aircraft carrier strike group is now in the Mediterranean on its way to the Middle East. President Trump has said again that he's considering a limited military strike against Iran if it fails to make a deal on its nuclear program. Our defense correspondent Jonathan Beale reports.
Iran knows trouble may be coming. This week, its Revolutionary Guard putting on a show of force in the Gulf of Oman, a signal it's ready to resist any attack. President Trump has made clear the clock is ticking.
We're either going to get a deal or it's going to be unfortunate for them. I would think that would be enough time, 10, 15 days, pretty much maximum.
The surge of US military power is increasing. This week, more F-22 jets arrived in the UK, likely heading east. The last time they crossed the Atlantic in large numbers was when the US hit Iran's nuclear sites in June. The US already had a significant military presence in the Middle East, with bases in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE. But over the past month, there's been a massive military buildup. Squadrons of fighter jets, including F-15s, F-35s, and F-22s have flown to the region. Just as significant is the arrival of dozens of US refueling aircraft, as well as early warning radar systems. But the US also now has a large naval presence. The US aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, loaded with squadrons of fighter jets, is already in the Gulf. A second carrier group, the USS Gerald R. Ford, has now reached the Mediterranean, backed up by a dozen warships loaded with Tomahawk cruise missiles. Altogether, this is the largest US air and naval buildup in the region since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. But what's the goal? At first, President Trump signaled this military muscle was a response to Iranian protests. Now it's all about getting a deal to stop its nuclear program. So will he use it?
I think it's likely, but not inevitable. And I think my read of this situation, as someone who has been doing this sort of thing for decades now, is that Trump wants a deal. And sometimes I worry that he wants a deal too badly.
President Trump's already shown he's willing to target Iran's nuclear program. But last year's Operation Midnight Hammer did not obliterate it. The question now is whether he'll try again, in a mission which could become more protracted, difficult and dangerous. Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
Threats of war escalate in the Middle East as the U.S. military buildup continues. This graphic shows the recent buildup of U.S. air power in the Middle East. The Wall Street Journal reporting it's the largest in the region since the Iraq War in 2003. In Israel, the IDF Home Front Command has been directed to prepare for full-scale war. Iran is holding joint naval exercises with Russia and the Chinese. The regime is also calling on Hezbollah to join them in the event of a U.S. military strike.
There's many reasons and arguments that one could make for a strike against Iran.
U.S. military officials say they're ready to strike as early as Saturday. Leavitt reiterated that little progress was made during Wednesday's nuclear talks.
Diplomacy is always his first option, and Iran would be very wise to make a deal with President Trump and with this administration.
Secretary of War Pete Hegseth told CBN News the decision to strike Iran lies with President Trump.
Should they not follow through on commitments, should they not be willing to make a deal, the president has an option. The only one that will make this decision, well, two people will make this decision. The Iranians can step up and make a real deal, and then ultimately President Trump will decide whether or not it's a deal that's good enough for the American people.
Middle East political analyst Esther Braun says any deal with Iran should come with reservation. Braun recently wrote this Times of Israel article titled built to deceive why Iran can't make a real deal, where she explains the Iranian Islamic tactic known as taqiyya.
Taqiyya was a survival mechanism. The believer could conceal his faith, conceal his style of life to save his life, to save his property, to save his community.
Braun says Western diplomacy wants to resolve conflicts. Iranian culture uses taqiyya to manage it.
It's not like they are lying because they have a purpose to lie. It's just the way how they see the whole process of negotiations.
While U.S. military officials say they're prepared to strike Iran as early as Saturday, President Trump is weighing his options.
So now we may have to take it a step further, or we may not. Maybe we're going to make a deal. You're going to be finding out over the next probably 10 days.
The Wall Street Journal reports that Trump is considering an initial attack on Iran, possibly within days, to force it to meet U.S. nuclear demands. The limited strike options include attacks on nuclear and ballistic missile facilities. If Iran still wouldn't go along, the U.S. could launch a broader military campaign in an effort to potentially overthrow the Islamic government. The Journal also reports that there is still a wide gap with negotiations. Iran is refusing to limit its ballistic missile program and has said that no country can deprive it of its right for nuclear enrichment.
And now is the time for Iran to join us on a path that will complete what we're doing. And if they join us, that'll be great. If they don't join us, that'll be great too. But it'll be a very different path.
If that path results in a full-scale war, a former U.S. Central Command deputy tells the Jerusalem Post the American military could dismantle Iran's power structure core within hours. Meanwhile, the European Union has formally added Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to its terrorist list, as Iran warns in this letter to the UN that if attacked, all hostile bases and assets in the region would be considered legitimate targets. The USS Gerald R. Ford is equipped to counter Iranian strikes. The aircraft carrier is expected to be positioned off Israel's coast to protect Tel Aviv and Haifa.
We're prepared for any scenario. And one thing is certain, if the Ayatollahs make a mistake and attack us, they will face a response they can't even imagine.
And while there are preparations for war here in the Middle East, the President's Board of Peace held its first meeting in Washington. In the inaugural meeting, Trump pledged $17 billion toward the reconstruction of Gaza. The board's plan also included more than 30,000 international soldiers and police officers to replace Israeli soldiers in Gaza, with Israel again saying it won't withdraw troops unless Hamas disarms.
That includes all its weapons, its terror infrastructure, underground tunnel network, and weapons production facilities must all be dismantled. There must be a fundamental de-radicalization process. The infrastructure that indoctrinates Palestinian children to hate and kill Jews in educational and religious institutes should no longer exist.
Paul Petit, CBN News, Jerusalem.
I'm joined now by our Middle East correspondent, Paul Petit. Great stories, Paul, about a really tough subjects. Oh. What do you think's coming?
Yeah, frightening stories as well. You know, it's hard to say. We're in the sort of the chess game mode. I move this way, you move that. Trump constantly moving the timeline for when he might attack. Iran building up with Russia, doing drills with their Navy. So it's anyone's guess at this point. We'll just have to literally go day by day.
Yeah, the Jerusalem municipality sent out today this a little booklet, online booklet in multiple languages, and it's says to be ready for routine and unforeseen situations. But basically, it's all about getting where you go if there's an attack, and how to prepare your home, and how to relate to your kids when you're in the bomb shelter. So it's clear that Israelis are preparing.
Yeah, and there's an app that you can only get when you're actually in Israel, Homefront Command it's called, which warns you of a missile attack. This is everyday life here in Israel for those that have never visited or been here, at certain times. And so, everyone's on high alert. Obviously, the command is on high alert here in Israel. Yeah. And what that means is everybody is poised. No one knows when it could happen, but we need to be prepared, as you're showing there. And an interesting footnote today, I learned that 59% of Israelis are in support of joining the U.S. Should there be an attack on Iran.
Yeah, I think because Israelis know if any deal with Iran is probably not going to go anywhere. You know, they're just making a big show of the whole thing. They're not going to get rid of Hezbollah and Hamas. They want to keep funding them. So, you know, for Israelis, that's very practical. I mean, it goes from terror attacks to war on the borders. It's not a simple thing. And, you know, it's also the missile issue. They don't want to have anything. They want their missiles to defend themselves, excuse me, but, you know, if they weren't aggressive, they wouldn't have to defend themselves.
Yeah, and so that's where we're at in this point in time. And I think it's interesting, the timing of the Board of Peace meeting, too, because it's sort of a model of what has to happen if it's done correctly in Gaza, what needs to happen in Iran. And the bottom line is that you just can't kick the can down the road and let them keep their missiles. In the case of Gaza, let them keep their arms, because it's only a matter of time until they get ready again, and there's another attack on Israel. So it's really a regime change that has to happen. And so that's going to be the next question. How is that going to happen? And obviously, many people in Iran want that to happen sooner the better.
Yeah, they do. And, you know, I mean, Israel has proven time and time again that you can't just, because they're not changing their ideology, they're not changing their goal of destroying Israel and getting rid of the Jewish state. So if that's the case, then, you know, you have to get rid of them first.
Yep, we'll see what happens.
The U.S. and Iran are scheduled to hold a third round of negotiations this week. With a huge U.S. military presence in the region, President Trump is curious why Iran still hasn't made a deal.
U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee is responding to criticism after his comments in an interview with Tucker Carlson. CBN News Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl reports.
U.S. Special Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are due to meet with Iran's foreign minister for a third round of talks in Geneva, Switzerland on Thursday. Witkoff says President Trump is puzzled that Iran hasn't already agreed to a deal.
Why under this sort of pressure, with the amount of sea power, naval power that we have over there, why they haven't come to us and said, we profess that we don't want a weapon, so here's what we're prepared to do, and yet it's hard to sort of get them to that place.
With massive U.S. firepower in the region, President Trump is said to be considering preliminary limited military strikes to force Iran into an agreement. Israel is on its highest alert as it prepares for Iranian retaliation if the U.S. attacks Iran. In recent days, the IDF striking Hezbollah targets in Lebanon as the Iranian proxy would likely join the fight. Iran's president says the government will not yield to external pressure. The state news agency reports student protests at several universities following memorials for those killed in the January protests. Visiting U.S. Congressman Andy Ogles told CBN News in Jerusalem that regime change needs to be organic.
What we've seen over the last few weeks is that the Persian people, the people of Iran, want change. They want their country back. And so I think there's the opportunity for the United States to create that window for the Persian people to, assume their own destiny. But it has to be from the Persian people, the people of Iran. No American boots on the ground.
Ogles says the change would revolutionize Iran, the Middle East, and even the world.
They've destabilized regions all over, countries all over the world, and it'll be a huge shift and quite frankly opens up the opportunity, at least for peace globally, once Iran is no longer in the picture, and quite frankly their global network of terror.
On the sidelines, Arab and Muslim nations condemned U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee's comment about the Middle East in an interview with Tucker Carlson last week. Carlson quoted from Genesis chapter 15 and asked Huckabee if Israel has a right to all that land. In part, Huckabee responded, it would be fine if they took it all. But the U.S. Embassy later pointed out it was taken out of context. Huckabee continued,
they're not asking to go back to take all of that, but they are asking to at least take the land that they now occupy, they now live in, they now own legitimately, and it is a safe haven for them.
He also said Israel isn't trying to take over Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, or Iraq, just trying to protect itself. U.S. Congressman Scott Perry, who is visiting Israel for the first time, told CBN News that the situation is complicated and it's important to see the facts on the ground.
A lot of people really don't fully understand what
what the people of Israel deal with on a daily basis, how close your adversaries are, and tactically the advantages they have based on terrain. All those kind of things are important for policymakers to know viscerally.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, all Ambassador Huckabee was doing was responding to what I consider a setup question. What's the grant? What's the promise to Abraham in the book of Genesis? And how broad is that geography? And when you read it, it's enormous. But that's not the situation on the ground in modern Israel today, and that's what he correctly pointed out. Here's the facts on the ground. The UN, under the mandate from the League of Nations, under the mandate that was granted to the UK after World War I, they continued that, and they called for a partition of Palestine into Israel and to a Palestinian state. What did the Palestinians do? What did the other Arab nations do to help their Arab brothers living there? Well, they declared war. And who won that war? Israel won that war. In the 1950s, they declared war again. There was another one. They lost that war. In 1967, there was another one. They lost that war. In 1973, there was another one. They lost that war. In all of that time, Israel kept offering them a Palestinian state. David Ben-Gurion famously offered them everything, including the Temple Mount, which was inconceivable. But he did it for the sake of peace. In every one of those opportunities, they never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. They had plenty of time to create their own state. They had plenty of time for peace. They had plenty of time to recognize what the UN had recognized, that the Jewish people belong in their ancestral homeland. They've refused to do it, and that's why you still hear the call from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Let us not join with that. They are clearly the aggressors.
Warships on the horizon, secret succession plans, and desperate rounds of diplomacy. This usually means one thing in geopolitics, that war is coming. In this case, a war between Iran and the United States of America. Most reports say it's a question of when, not if. The US military is locked and loaded. All they need is a green light from President Donald Trump. It's a crucial moment in Iran's modern history, and the people sense it. Protests have broken out in Iranian universities. Students are shouting, "We will reclaim Iran." Most of them are paying tributes to the recent anti-government protesters. Take a look at this. Remember, huge protests rocked Iran in December and January. The regime responded with a bloody crackdown. They killed thousands of innocent protesters, and yet these students are back on the streets again. It tells you how the tide is shifting. The regime is at its weakest point since the revolution of 1979, so rivals, both at home and abroad, smell blood. And the Iranian regime knows this. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has put a succession plan in place. Reports say it has 4 layers of backup, meaning 4 possible replacements for every important role. So if the US kills one, the others are ready. That's Khamenei's plan if the Americans attack. And the man overseeing this plan is Ali Larijani. He hails from a powerful political family in Iran. He's been a long-time advisor to the supreme leader. From 2008 to 2020, he was Speaker of Iran's parliament. In 2021, he negotiated a 25-year cooperation deal with China, and right now he heads the Supreme National Security Council. Larijani is crushing protests. He is meeting Vladimir Putin in Moscow. He is holding talks with Qatar and Oman. So simply put, he is the second most powerful man in Iran, even more powerful than President Masoud Pezeshkian. And I'll give you an example of that. During the recent protests, Washington reached out to Iran's foreign ministry. They wanted a back channel to calm the tensions. They wanted back channel talks. So naturally, the foreign ministry asked the Iranian presidency, what should they do? And guess what President Pezeshkian said? Ask Larijani. That's how powerful this man is. His primary mission is to ensure that the regime survives. Now, just to be clear, this does not mean that Ali Larijani will succeed Khamenei. To become supreme leader, you must be a senior Shia cleric. And Larijani is not. Reports say Khamenei has named 3 possible successors. None of their names have been revealed yet, which brings us back to the military tensions. What exactly is Donald Trump's mission here? Indications are that he does not want a full-scale war. His deployments were aimed at intimidating Iran, basically scaring them into making concessions. Trump's special envoy admitted as much.
He's curious as to why they haven't, I don't want to use the word capitulated, but why they haven't capitulated. Why under this sort of pressure with the amount of sea power, naval power that we have over there, why they haven't come to us and said, we profess that we don't want a weapon, so here's what we're prepared to do. And yet it's hard to sort of get them to that place.
Despite the firepower, Iran did not budge. And you can see why. Trump has 2 major demands. 1, Iran must give up nuclear enrichment, and 2, Iran must curb its missile program. The second one, the missile program, is a non-starter for Iran. If they give up the missiles, they will be attacked in the future. That's a guarantee. As for the nukes, Iran is naturally wary. They had signed a nuclear deal with the US back in 2015, when it was Donald Trump who ripped it up. So this time, Iran wants more guarantees and sanctions relief. These issues will likely come up again on Thursday. That's when the US and Iran will meet in Geneva once again on Thursday. It will be their 3rd round of talks in 4 weeks. And it tells you how urgent the situation is. But what if the talks fail? Well, then the ball is in Trump's court. He can either launch a limited strike to force concessions from Iran, and if that fails, he can go all out. He can try to topple the Iranian regime. But here's the deal. Tehran knows exactly what is coming. In fact, everyone knows what is coming. Several countries are asking their citizens to leave Iran. Today, the Indian government also issued an advisory. It is asking Indians to leave Iran because of the tensions. As for the Iranian regime, they've made extensive preparations. They have placed ballistic missiles to the west and the south. From the west, they can hit Israel. From the south, they can hit US warships and bases. Today, Tehran made its position clear. Even a limited strike will get a furious response.
There is no limited strikes. An act of aggression would be regarded as an act of aggression, period. And any state would react to an act of aggression as part of its inherent right of self-defense ferociously. So that's what we would do.
Trump put himself in this position, and now he faces a very difficult choice. Retreat is not even on the table. Trump has to do something to salvage his position, but that something could trigger the worst West Asian war in decades. It will put American warships and soldiers at risk. Yes, in the long term, Iran may lose, but the top leadership will be decapitated. Maybe the top leadership will be decapitated. But in the short term, they can inflict heavy damage. Let's see which way Trump goes.
Protests erupting across Iran against the Ayatollah's regime as negotiations between the Middle Eastern nation and the U.S. are heating up.
Let's go live now to Nate Foy in London for more. Hi, Nate.
Hey, Todd, Carly, good morning. So this diplomatic back and forth continues this week with Steve Witkoff set to meet with Iran's foreign minister on Thursday in Geneva. But as these talks continue, the threat of American military force looms large. President Donald Trump last Friday said he'll make a decision in the next 10 days or so about whether or not to strike Iran. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister said over the weekend that the country will not cave to American pressure.
If they want to find a resolution for Iran's peaceful nuclear program, the only way is diplomacy. And we have proved this in the past, and I believe that still there is a good chance to have a diplomatic solution which is based on a win-win game. So there is no need for any military buildup, and military buildup cannot help it and cannot pressurize us.
So there's reportedly a couple options on the table for President Trump if negotiations don't go well. Trump may order a limited military strike to gain leverage and force a deal, or he could use a more broad campaign that aims to threaten the regime led by the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The New York Times came out with this on Sunday, entitled, quote, Trump considers targeted strike against Iran followed by larger attack. And as you mentioned, the negotiations play out amid renewed protest in Tehran, where thousands of people have been killed since January. Last Thursday, in fact, was the biggest day of protest since January 11th. So tensions are high, a big week ahead. We mentioned the talks on Thursday. And then after that, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will visit Israel and meet with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Saturday. We'll send it back to you, Todd and Carly.
All right, Nate Foy, live for us in London. Nate, thank you so much. Let's bring in former NSC Chief of Staff under President Trump, Alex Gray. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. So as Nate was just talking about, the president has a lot of options on the table when it comes to how to deal with Iran. Which option, in your opinion, would lead to the best possible outcome for the United States?
Well, thanks for having me, Carly. I think the best outcome for the United States here is the president uses a surgical strike to go after the missile program, the terrorist proxies, keep them from reconstituting. I really do worry, and I know the president, just based on his history and what he said for the last 10 years, shares this concern, is that if we go in and we do something more comprehensive, we're potentially going to get dragged into something we can't control. And so I think a strike that is tailored, surgical, targeted, and is very much focused on taking out the most dangerous elements of the regime's tools is most in the interest of the United States.
When it comes to a potential timeline, Marco Rubio is going to be in Israel this week. Does that give you any indication of if a strike does take place, when it would be? I can imagine they wouldn't want that to happen when the Secretary of State is in the region.
Well, I think that's right. And this is the great part about what the president has done in terms of this huge armada and huge toolkit that he's put in the region, is the president really has a lot of flexibility, and that flexibility in terms of when he would use it, whether it's after the secretary leaves, a week after that, a couple days after that, the Iranians have no idea. And it forces them, and particularly in these diplomatic negotiations, it forces them into a much weaker position tactically because they have no idea whether the president's going to strike at any given moment. And that certainly is a psychological impact on the leaders of Iran and a huge advantage in the United States' court.
Okay, so there's this uniquely detailed article in the New York Times about what's going on inside Iran right now. And it says that Iran is operating on the basis that a U.S. military strike is inevitable and imminent. And they go on to say the country has positioned its ballistic missiles so that they could hit Israel. And it also says that they are along the southern shore of the Persian Gulf within range of American military bases. So if this limited strike does take place that the president is weighing and you say could lead to the possible best outcome for the United States in the end, I mean, there is that risk to our military bases in the region. So how should we contend with that, and how concerned should we be about that?
Well, we should be concerned. The Iranians are certainly not 12 feet tall, like some in Washington have made them out to be. But the Iranians, as we saw during the Soleimani strike, where they retaliated against U.S. troops, and they actually severely injured with traumatic brain injuries a number of U.S. troops in early 2020. They have capabilities, and they certainly in last year they retaliated against Israel, and they sent a barrage of missiles, and Israelis were hiding in bomb shelters because of the Iranian retaliation. That said, the retaliation is, I think, can be contained, and that's why we've sent THAAD missiles and Patriot batteries to the region to protect our installations. The Israelis, of course, have Iron Dome and other capabilities. So I think this is all containable for a limited strike. Yeah. We have to make a decision about what's in our best interest, as I said, Carly, and I think that's a targeted surgical strike, and retaliation can be dealt with.
Yeah, and man, there's another round of protests taking place inside Iran right now, 40 days after, they have that 40-day mourning period. The number of deaths that took place in December and January, so that is taking place and proves that Iran isn't only fighting for, a potential military action from the United States and Israel, but their own political survival as well, which certainly factors into everything here. We do have to leave it there. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. We're certainly going to talk to you in the days ahead.
This is going to be a test of Iran's leaders. If the administration believes the Iranians have failed the test, then the enormous military package that the Trump administration has put into place, which is genuine and serious and unprecedented in history of U.S. Pressure against the Islamic Republic, will likely be put to use.
Look, from Israel's perspective here, and I think from a lot of the outside analysts, the nuclear program was seen to be mostly dealt with in this last June, according to Mr. Trump as well, that this was a non-issue. It may not even be the most pressing one right now in terms of Israel's concerns, what the U.S. should be concerned about the region. Has it all been boiled down to just the mostly destroyed nuclear program and Tehran's nuclear ambitions at this point?
No. So what we're facing is for the Trump administration, they have the following situation. Iran is at a point in its history where its leaders have to decide whether the Islamic Republic will survive or not. So that's the frame situation. The nuclear weaponization program has certainly been severely degraded, if not destroyed, but it can be rebuilt. So how do you get Iran to not rebuild that program? And now you have a missile program, which Iran is expanding, and the technology of these missiles is improving in terms of accuracy, in terms of how warheads are being handled. How do you get Iran not to build that program any further? Plus, Iran's space launch vehicle program looks exactly like an intercontinental ballistic missile program, which is expanding and will be a threat to the United States in the future. How do you prevent that from happening? And last, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis still exist, and the Quds Force still exists. And that's a recipe for a renewal of proxies in a few years. How do you prevent that from happening? So it's reasonable that the Trump administration would look at this situation and say, how do we exert pressure right now to prevent this all from happening in the future? Or do you kick the can down the road and pay the price at some time at a future point? The Trump administration is doing smart policy and trying to see how it can prevent these costly things from happening in the future.
Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Sivan Raviv, coming to you live from Israel, bringing you all the biggest headlines from across the region. It's currently 7 a.m. in New York and 2 p.m. here in Israel. Let's get into all of the latest developments of the last hour. A 48-hour deadline is ticking down toward a U.S. attack on Iran. Reports are indicating that the U.S. has given Iran a 48-hour deadline to submit a detailed nuclear proposal or risk the collapse of talks and a military attack. U.S. negotiators are set to meet Iranian officials in Geneva on Thursday and Friday, but only if Tehran delivers a plan Washington considers serious. President Donald Trump is reportedly holding a firm on a zero enrichment demand, while signaling limited flexibility if Iran can prove it has no pathway to a nuclear weapon. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi has confirmed he will attend the summit. Washington confirmed the talks as U.S. negotiator Steve Witkoff warned Iran could theoretically be just a week away from enriching uranium to weapons-grade levels, a claim that stresses the urgency. President Trump has reportedly told senior advisors he is prepared to escalate dramatically against Iran if diplomacy or even an initial U.S. strike fails to force Tehran to abandon its nuclear program. According to officials briefed on internal deliberations, Trump is considering a limited military strike in the coming days as well, designed to send a clear message to Iran's leaders that they must give up any capability to produce a nuclear weapon. Potential targets reportedly include the headquarters of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, key nuclear facilities, and elements of the ballistic missile program. But the president has also signaled something far larger. If initial action does not work, he may consider a much broader military campaign later this year, one aimed at weakening or even toppling Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. As U.S. and Iranian negotiators are set to meet in Geneva Thursday in what appears to be a last effort to avoid conflict, behind the scenes a possible compromise is being discussed, allowing Iran a strictly limited enrichment program for medical purposes only. 2 U.S. aircraft carrier groups and dozens of warplanes are now within striking distance of Iran as the White House weighs its next move. And fresh anti-regime protests have erupted for a second day on Iranian university campuses, with students openly defying the Islamic Republic and waving the banned flag of the ousted Shah. Demonstrations were reported at 5 universities in Tehran and 1 in Mashhad, centered around 40-day memorial services for the thousands killed in last month's brutal crackdown on nationwide unrest. Videos from Sharif University of Technology show large crowds chanting anti-government slogans, with some students holding the pre-revolution monarchy flag, a highly symbolic challenge to the Islamic Republic. The latest rallies come weeks after what activists describe as the deadliest crackdown of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's rule. And as Iran now braces for the possibility of war with the United States and Israel, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei has quietly restructured the Islamic Republic's power structure, entrusting much of the country's day-to-day control to his longtime ally, Ali Larijani. Larijani, a former Revolutionary Guard commander and now head of the Supreme National Security Council, has effectively been running crisis management since January, sidelining President Pezeshkian as Tehran faces anti-regime protests at home and the threat of the military attack by the United States. Khamenei has ordered layers of succession for key military and government posts, naming multiple backups in case of assassinations or communication breakdown during an attack. A new National Defense Council has been established, and Parliament Speaker Galibash has been designated to command armed forces in times of war. Security forces from the Basij militia are preparing for street deployments to suppress unrest if ordered. Khamenei strikes a defiant tone, warning that any attack would be met with a devastating response, but behind the scenes, Iran's leadership is clearly preparing not just for war, but for survival. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will arrive in Israel on Wednesday for a high-profile visit that includes an address to the Knesset, talks with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and a visit to Yad Vashem. Netanyahu confirmed the visit at the weekly cabinet meeting, describing India as a global power and calling Modi a personal friend. The two leaders are expected to focus on expanding cooperation in high-tech, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing, areas both countries see as strategic priorities. Modi responded on social media thanking Netanyahu and praising the relationship as one built on trust, innovation, and a shared commitment to peace and progress. Netanyahu said his broader vision is to build what he called a hexagon of allies across the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and the Mediterranean, positioning India as a key partner in countering radical regional axis. Let's take a listen.
ניתן ביטוי ליחסים מיוחדים שנרקמו במהלך השנים האחרונות בין ישראל לבין המעצמה העולמית הודו, וביני לבין העומד בראשה, ראש הממשלה נרנדרה מודי. אנחנו ידידים אישיים, מדברים תכופות בטלפון, מבקרים זה את זה. מרקם היחסים הלך והתהדק, והוא יבוא הנה כדי שנוכל להדק אותו עוד יותר בסדרה של החלטות שקשורות להידוק בשיתוף פעולה בין הממשלות, בין המדינות, שיתוף פעולה כלכלי, שיתוף פעולה מדיני ושיתוף פעולה ביטחוני.
הציג אותו. And with this 48-hour U.S. deadline ticking down and American carrier groups positioned within striking distance, tensions with Iran appear closer to confrontation than at any point before. Joining me now to discuss the latest developments is Professor Meir Litvak, head of the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies at Tel Aviv University, and Major in Reserves Elliot Chodov, political and military analyst. Thank you both for joining.
Good afternoon.
Elliot, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Thank you for joining us. So there is now a 48-hour deadline given to Iran to present the U.S. as an acceptable counter plan, or else. Do you believe this deadline to be real? We've heard threats before.
Everything is real, and at the same time, everything is not, especially with the current administration. Let's remember that this all began 6 weeks ago with President Trump telling the demonstrators, step it up, help us on the way, and it never arrived. The idea of 48-hour deadline sounds good, but unless an acceptable plan is presented, acceptable to whom? In other words, the decision to go ahead or not go ahead is a completely fluid one. If Witkoff says it's acceptable, then they continue negotiating. If he says it's not, then it's not. And what it actually says matters less than what the administration decides to do.
Do you believe that this is in Witkoff or the mediator's hands at this point?
It's in his hands in the sense that Trump relies on him. He trusts him. I believe that Witkoff was sent to make a deal. And personally, that's concerning to me because making a deal means giving in on points that perhaps in international strategy shouldn't be given in on. But ultimately, the decision is going to be Trump's. He's caught on the horns of a number of dilemmas as well, including his domestic base not supporting a military action against Iran. So where he's going to go and how he's going to decide is based really on his decision making. And as I said, the Iranians will certainly present something. Whether it's acceptable or not is something that the Americans are going to decide.
Now, if Trump is demanding zero enrichment, is there any realistic path for Iran to agree to such a thing? Does diplomacy actually have a chance, in your opinion?
I don't believe the Iranians will agree to it. On the other hand, they can agree to it and then lie down the road. In other words, here again, there are layers of strategy. There are two U.S. aircraft carrier task forces, one here already, one on the verge of being here. If the Iranians come to some sort of an agreement and the Americans withdraw their forces, the Iranians can basically do whatever they want. Carrier task forces can't be turned around and brought back at will. Certainly not the Ford task force. The Ford needs to get back its longest deployment ever. So how much will the Iranians play a game? How much will they play brinksmanship? How much will they hope that they can get away with the window dressing? Again, these are decisions that are being made in Tehran. How much the Americans accept all of that are decisions made in Washington. Here, just to be clear, the reality, I think, has less impact than the decisions and perceptions of the leadership.
Now, Professor Meir Litvak, are you with us? I'd like to bring you into the conversation. Can you hear me, Meir?
Yes, there's a bad connection. I apologize, but I'm trying.
We'll give it a shot anyhow. So, Professor Litvak, what are your projections here? Is there a way back from all of these threats from the last few weeks, Trump's threats? Is there a real chance for diplomacy?
I think both sides, prefer a deal over confrontation. Of course, each demands a very significant price. It would lose a war, but it prefers confronting America, losing a battle, than making concessions, expose the regime's weakness, and then endanger it domestically. So
You're cutting out a little bit, Professor Litvak.
The Iranians losing complete surrender to America.
Mm-hmm. So I wasn't sure that I was able to hear the full answer. Let's try just to get a few words. Do you believe that there's a chance for diplomacy?
I think there is a chance for diplomacy because I think both sides prefer a diplomatic deal over war. Again, for the Iran regime, making a deal, going to war against the U.S.
I apologize. We are having some bad reception here. Professor Litvak, why don't you check your reception and let's try this in a few moments again. In the meantime, Elliot, can I continue with you? What could Iran actually agree to compromise on in a deal? Is there something that they could compromise on, in your opinion?
Honestly, they're not going to compromise, and they've been very clear. They on the issues of ballistic missiles, they're not even willing to discuss. On the issues of supporting Hezbollah, Houthis, and other terrorist organizations, proxies and otherwise, they're not willing to discuss. The nuclear issue is always up for discussion with them, as we've seen in the past, because it's eminently easy for them to cheat. They will not agree to zero. Again, unless it says total window dressing for a month. And I agree with Professor Litvak, they have to be very careful not to show weakness because they do have an opposition that's waiting to jump out there. We see that with the student demonstrations today on the 40th anniversary, the memorial to those who were killed. So they have to be seen as strong because if not, they can lose the regime. Realistically, they can agree to some sort of percentage of enrichment because we know once they go to a percentage, they can take it from one to another and they can do it secretly. They've done it in the past and they would do it in the future.
And so if these talks set for this week, if they collapse, what could we be looking at, do you think? A limited strike, something symbolic, or really an all-out war?
A symbolic strike is a waste of time and it's a waste of lives. The Iranians have made very clear, and I understand them. They're not going to back down simply by signaling. And I think that's been true all along. They have their strategic direction, they have their ideological, their religious direction and interests, and they're not going to compromise on them. So taking out a few targets in the sense of, okay, we hit you, we punished you a little bit, now behave yourselves, is simply not realistic. If we're talking about a full-scale operation, whether it's in phase one or after the failure of a limited operation, here I'm going to quote Winston Churchill, everybody knows how to start a war, nobody knows how to end one. To predict what happens after the immediate strike is folly, and I don't think it pays to go there.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the U.S. has the ability to topple the regime? Is regime change militarily even achievable from the air?
No. Regime change has to come from the ground, and as we've learned, those of us in the business knew it even before the lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan, it has to come from within. Now, coming from within doesn't mean without the support of outsiders, but it has to be support. So once again, the opportunity was there, and there are no guarantees, obviously, but the opportunity was there 6 weeks ago. Had America struck then decisively, strategically, again, not symbolically, but hitting IRGC targets, communications, infrastructure, and the like, that might have weakened the regime enough for the demonstration/uprising to have made that shift. Here again, the students are demonstrating. They have not gone to violence. Could they go to violence with a weakened regime? Very possibly. In other words, that could set the stage for a true uprising. Ultimately, I have a basic rule, and we saw it in the last round, and that is that an uprising revolution succeeds when the rebels have more people willing to die than the regime is willing and able to kill. The regime is certainly willing to kill. What American air power can do is reduce its capability below the level of where they can kill more people than the rebels are willing to lose. Last but not least, a key in all of this is the military, not the IRGC, but the national military. They are not ideological, and typically in these kinds of situations, they will go with the side that they believe can win. And if they believe the rebels can win, it'll become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that they can shift over and go to the rebels, and that could bring down the regime.
Now, if the U.S. strikes first, how likely is the regional escalation? Will Hezbollah join in, do you think? And do they even have the military capability at the moment, considering the past 2 years?
Hezbollah has a military capability nowhere near what it had a couple of years ago. But here, let's also keep in mind, for Hezbollah more than any other group, the survival of the Khomeiniist regime, the Islamic Republic, is critical, since Hezbollah is not a proxy of Iran, it is part of Iran. It's a subordinate of the Quds force of the IRGC. In other words, no Iran, and for all intents and purposes, there's no Hezbollah. This is not true for Hamas and Islamic Jihad, for example. They have other sources. So even if it's a suicide attempt or a suicide mission for them, in the sense that they don't have the capability, they're still going to try to do it. And of course, the IDF is preparing for that, knowing that it's a very real possibility. It's not so much a military strategic decision for Hezbollah, but rather a political strategic decision. They can't afford to let the regime in Iran go under because of the end of them as well.
Now, from Israel's perspective, is this the moment that Israel has been waiting for? Is a strike something that Israel wants, or could this spiral out of control for Israel?
Any war can spiral out of control, and a lot depends on the targeting, the skill of the American planners and its execution. Does Israel get involved or not? And again, these are the decisions that are made at the highest political levels. Do the Americans want Israeli support or not? Militarily, that would be helpful. Politically, not necessarily in the Middle East, and they have to balance that. If the Americans say stay out of it, then Israel will stay out of it, and unless Iranian strikes force an Israeli response. On the other hand, the Americans could say, you know what, you guys are really good at this. After we send the initial strikes, join in and coordinate. And these are things that again, are decided at the very, very highest levels. Will Iran attempt to hit Israel? In all probability, the answer is yes. How well can Israel and the American forces defend against that remains to be seen. That's one of the realities of war. You can estimate and you can guesstimate, but ultimately it's going to be tested on the battlefield.
I'm hearing that Netanyahu reportedly seems to be concerned. Does he have reason to be?
Concerned about what? About Iranian strikes?
About the possibility of a retaliation from Iran. Or perhaps about the fact that Trump may not strike after all.
Okay, so that was why I asked. In which direction are we going? Look, if the Americans leave the Iranians in power, essentially everything that was done in the past year will ultimately be wasted. The Iranians will rebuild. It'll take them however long it does, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. In strategic terms, that's not very long. And we're right back at square one. So a fear of leaving the Iranians to their own devices is a real fear and a legitimate one. A fear of Iranian response, retaliation against Israel is also real. And here again, we've seen that they have capability. We saw it the last time, not the capabilities that they said that they had. And of course, they played it up afterwards as if they had destroyed Tel Aviv in the process. And of course, we know that was nonsense. On the other hand, their ballistic missiles, some of them did get through. They caused damage. They caused casualties. And if they're pressed to the wall, casualties, lives, yes. Yeah. If they're pressed to the wall, every system, and this includes the American nuclear strategic arm, every system has some option in there called use them or lose them. If they see that they're being really pushed to the end, they will fire everything they've got. because it serves them no purpose to save, for the future. And it could cause considerable damage here. Once again, an equation, an algebra that we have no way of calculating, is it worth it to see the end of the Islamic Republic? Once again, those are questions that can be debated in at this stage. Only after the reality and time will tell, will we be able to say whether it was or it wasn't.
I have to say, by now, we would have thought that we'd be in a different place. After all of these weeks, all of the threats, I think Israelis are quite surprised by the stalling and the stagnation. Are you?
I'm not surprised. Trump is a master of chaos, and the threats are part of that, which is why he's unpredictable. And let's say this, in warfare, unpredictability has its value. In diplomacy, international relations, not so much. And we're all, the whole world is watching and saying, okay, what happens next? A few weeks ago, every 24 hours it was going to happen tonight. It was going to happen tonight. And now we're looking at a possibility that may not happen in the next week or 10 days. He said 10 days, then he said 48 hours. Maybe the next one will be 3 weeks. And there's just no way of telling with him.
Right, certainly. That's why I began my questions by asking, is this 48-hour deadline, is it for real? Now, let me ask you one more question. Is it possible that the Americans will strike and Israel will not be involved? Is that a possibility at all?
It's a possibility. I can think of two possibilities or two options on that. One is the Americans say we want to do it ourselves, stay out of it. And with that, the Iranian retaliation against Israel is not terribly damaging or devastating, or not at all. It's all stopped or intercepted by the Americans and by Israeli air defenses, in which case Israel can essentially sit it out, similar to the Gulf War when the Scuds were falling here in 1991 and the Americans said, stay out of it, we don't want you involved. If it goes beyond a certain point, Israel will have no choice. In other words, here we're not talking about, and I lived through the Gulf War here as well, we're not talking about an occasional Scud coming over in the course of a couple of months. The Iranians have a capability, of, as we said before, of doing real damage, and that's not something Israel is going to be able to sit out. So that here again, there's a balance of we'll have to wait and see. There could very well be a case of Israel not getting involved, but that can also turn over overnight. And once again, war being unpredictable.
Have to wait and see. Let's address for a moment what's happening inside Iran right now. So you've mentioned the protests from several weeks ago. We are now seeing fresh protests on university campuses with students waving the banned pre-revolution flag. Are these protests significant, do you think? Is there a chance they'll escalate and that there will be another chance to what you mentioned earlier, another chance?
I don't think they're going to escalate on their own. I think that what's happening on the campuses now is that they're pushing the envelope. They've been told you'll be permitted to demonstrate, and the flags and that sort of thing are the edge of the envelope. But they've also been told, if you turn violent, we will respond with the violence that you saw 6 weeks ago. I think that here again, we're at one of those tipping point moments. If the Americans strike while the demonstrations are going on and weaken the IRGC sufficiently so that the students believe they can ratchet it up, then we might see another uprising happening now. These demonstrations, I don't believe, are going to go on for very long. In other words, they'll go another day or two, but if they don't step it up, they'll begin to fade away. I don't think they're going to do it on their own.
In your opinion, are we at a genuine turning point, or is this just another cycle as we've seen in recent weeks?
As I said, they've learned the lesson. Pick your number, 30, 40, 50, 60,000 killed by the regime. And they have been informed reliably that what they saw the last time they will see again, maybe even worse. So I don't think we're at a tipping point or at a critical point from within alone. I think that they will need some sort of accelerant, which would be an American strike, for example, while these protests are still hot. And how long that will be is unpredictable. This isn't an organized uprising with commanders. This is spontaneous, which has its value, but it also has its unpredictably. It can run a day, 2, 3, 5, and at any point along there, it can begin to dissipate. If the regime uses skilled anti-demonstration, anti-riot forces, as opposed to opening fire on them indiscriminately, they can also break it up. It's a tricky business, and once again, these are things that can go either way, which is why the first time around the regime let it go on for a while before they turned their weapons on them. There are no clear-cut formulas, so possible, but as I said, unlikely, in my opinion, that they will spontaneously erupt to the level that they were. They'll need some sort of an igniter, an accelerant, and that would be an American strike.
Well, Elliot Chodov, thank you very much for all of your input today.
My pleasure.
And finally, and on a different note, the National Religious Broadcasters is bringing its first ever Jerusalem Media Summit to Israel this November, marking a historic moment in the organization's 80-year history. In partnership with the government press office and I Travel Jerusalem, the summit will unite Christian and Jewish media leaders in a shared effort to push back against misinformation and rising hatred. The gathering comes on the heels of NRB's 2026 convention in Nashville and follows a solidarity mission led by CEO Troy Miller, underscoring a deepening commitment to Israel and to cooperation between faith communities. Set for November 1st through the 5th, the summit will bring journalists, communicators, influencers, and church leaders to the capital to confront the global surge of anti-Semitism and anti-Christian sentiment and to strengthen collaboration in what many describe as an ongoing information war after 2 years of conflict. Let's take a look.
NRB is proud to announce that we will be hosting the NRB Jerusalem Media Summit this fall, November 1st through the 5th. We will be convening Christian media professionals, communicators, church leaders from around the world so that together we can fight hatred.
After the announcement was made, Jerusalem Mayor Moshe Leon delivered a digital message. Let's take a listen.
Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and it is a spiritual capital of millions of believers across the globe, a city that lives in all our hearts. I hope you have time while you get here to see the city, to meet the people, to visit the holy sites, taste the flavors, and enjoy the blessings of Jerusalem.
And before we go for now, we've got some exciting news. You can now get Israel updates on our WhatsApp channel. Breaking stories, live updates, and verified reports, all delivered fast and accurate. Just scan the QR code on your screen to join. That's a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour, broadcasting live from Israel. I'm Sivan Raviv. Thank you very much for watching.
Let's bring in MS Now Julia Jester and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under the Obama administration, Joel Rubin. He's also the author of the briefing book Substack. Julia, what can you tell us about the state of negotiations and the threats in the region right now?
Well, Anna, I want to read for you the response from the Iranian Foreign Minister Arakchi to the Witkoff comments that we just heard, because I think it pretty much sums up where we are in these negotiations. Responding directly to that interview with Witkoff, Arakchi posted, "Curious to know why we do not capitulate? Because we are Iranian." And that really just does underscore the position that Iran is in with these negotiations. Now, zero enrichment continues to be a red line for the U.S., but it's not just the external pressures Iran is facing. It faces domestic pressures as well. We've seen these protests. And so with that potential limited strike option to bring Iran to the negotiating table you mentioned, it is questionable whether Iran will be able to do that and be able to face its own people. Now, I do want to note some of the tea leaves we're seeing a little bit in the region, that the embassy in Beirut has been evacuated, as you mentioned, and a senior State Department official said in his statement, quote, "We continuously assess the security environment, and based on our latest review, we determined it prudent to reduce our footprint to essential personnel." So that's a sign that they are trying to get Americans out of harm's way in that region. And in addition to that, Secretary Rubio was slated to travel to Israel on Saturday to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu. That has been pushed back. The State Department official said that the trip is still planned, but it is subject to change, and we'll see when exactly that happens. But these negotiations set on Thursday, according to the Omani foreign minister, as of right now, they are to be indirect negotiations. But when announcing these next round of talks, it was, quote, "with a positive push to go the extra mile toward finalizing the deal," according to the Omanis who have been mediating these talks, Anna. So we'll see if there's any progress, but it seems like both sides are digging in their heels, Anna.
And you point to what's happening today, and that is there's, Joel, this now evacuation happening in Beirut from the embassy. The New York Times has this report. The president's been considering a smaller initial strike meant to send a message to pressure Iran in these negotiations with a threat of a larger strike to come. Could that be an effective strategy, do you think, when dealing with Iran?
Well, you know, Anna, right now, what we're dealing with is an uncertainty about what the actual objective is. And to your description about the evacuation of the embassy, that's because there's chatter on the ground right now about potential proxy attacks by terrorist groups. Well, that used to be one of the issues that was up for negotiation. And remember, the president sent out forces to the region in response to the mass murder of Iranian civilians. But now the negotiations are about the nuclear program. And so I fear that we have a lot of confusion about what we're trying to achieve from a policy perspective. And the result is that we have different clocks turning at different times. We have negotiations, maybe a congressional vote in a week or two, military forces in the region. How long can they be there for? And without that clarity, we just don't really know how we're going to measure achievement of a real goal.
Julia, can you remind us what kind of military forces are there in the region right now?
Well, Anna, before the USS Gerald Ford entered the CENTCOM area of responsibility, there are roughly 40,000 American personnel, not including the Ford. The USS Lincoln carrier group has been there, and now, based on open source intelligence, it does appear that the USS Ford has entered the Mediterranean Sea. Now, that is key because it is in the region, but it's really going to have to transit into the Arabian Gulf to really serve its purpose. And why is that? U.S. bases in the region, you look at Qatar, the UAE, they do not have the adequate air defensive systems. But that math changes once you have two carrier groups in those waters, because you look at some of these countries and they have said that they will not authorize their airspace for U.S. action against Iran. But when you have these carrier groups, they can basically deploy so much from those ships. And it's not just the aircraft carriers themselves. It is also a lot of aircraft. We see F-22s, F-35s, E-3s heading into the regions with signals. It's not just fighter aircraft. It's also these intelligence-capable aircraft that shows that the U.S. is ready for a longer-term operation as opposed to just limited strikes, Anna.
And again, at the heart of all this is what to do about the nuclear program. And that's what these negotiations are focused on. The White House and Iran really seem directly at odds when it comes to what they'll accept for Iran's nuclear future. Take a look at what Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi had to say just yesterday.
The president he gave Jared and I direction before we went over there. There were red lines, zero enrichment. We have to have the material back. You know, they say that it's all about their civil program, and yet they've been enriching well beyond.
Enrichment is our right. We are a member of NPT, and we have every right to enjoy a peaceful nuclear energy, including enrichment. How we use this right is something related to us only.
Realistically, Joel, is there a way to move forward and potentially let Iran keep parts of its nuclear program?
Only if President Trump is willing to climb down from something he's made a center of his worldview and criticize President Obama for. If he wants to have an Obama-like deal, it's probably there for the taking. There may be minor enrichment facilities related to medical isotopes that he could live with. But I think that we're in a position now where the lack of confidence is so high that leaving Iran with the ability to enrich is frightening to this administration. And that's why we may very well be on a military path.
Joel Rubin, it's always great to have your analysis. Thank you, Julia
Thanks,
Jester.
Anna.
We appreciate your